government tested in all sorts of ways. Tonight's another one, and we'll see how.
And that's why we keep saying, Ed, that just because it takes a long time to get the number doesn't mean it's not working.
Correct. Patience.
You have to remind people that. Yeah.
That's an excellent point. And today and throughout the early voting, we have been interviewing voters across the country about why they cast their ballots. We call all of that information our exit polls. And all night, Major Garrett will break down those for us. And with everything, Major, the pandemic is one of the top issues.
Exactly. The pandemic is one of the top issues, and it influenced, Nora and team, how exit polls were conducted. Not just on Election Day today were those polls conducted. They were also conducted when people stood in line to vote early in person, and they were also conducted by phone with those who cast their ballots by mail. So it's a comprehensive look at the electorate, and it does go to that underlying question of why people did what they did. We'll get to the what happened later on tonight, but we can begin to describe what was on the voters' minds, and I want to give you two glimpses of the exit polls that get to some of that right now. What for Biden voters was one of the most important issues for them as they looked at the election this year. Control coronavirus came in at 79%, rebuild the economy 17%. For Trump voters, it was exactly the opposite. Rebuild the economy, you can see 70, containing the coronavirus 19. Okay, here's another part of this election that's very important. The character of the candidates as they presented themselves to the American public. What was important about Joe Biden's character to his voters? You can see that. Judgment, unite, cares about me, strong leader. Let's look at President Trump's supporters. Strong leader, way at the top, cares about me, good judgment, unite the country, 9%. So, as he closed his message, the president, did he focus on uniting the country? No, he focused on strong economy. What did Joe Biden focus on in the closing days? Deal with the virus, unite the country, and you can see, reflected in those exit polls, that's why the voters for both sides were where they were.
I mean, it's fascinating. That really is the divide. People who think that he did a good job on the economy want to stay with President Trump. People who think the coronavirus, the #1 issue, may be leaning towards Joe Biden tonight.
On the other hand, you have Joe Biden saying the soul of the country is at stake here tonight. Be very curious to see if that resonated with the voters.
And to your earlier conversation about what does the president get the memo on the coronavirus or not, his supporters believe rebuilding the economy is by far more important than controlling the coronavirus. And that's a divide, and that's why it exists.
How is that important if you're not here to spend the money, though, Major?
But it's all about their emphasis and reinforcing that emphasis. That's what politicians do. They reinforce the message their supporters most care about the most.
And that fault line exists in a long-time debate in American politics, which is, do I get to make my own decisions about my life, or does the government tell me what to do? So the economy is almost in some ways secondary on the mask debate and the coronavirus debate. It's a debate over who tells me what to do with my lives, with my life, and that is one of the oldest debates in American politics. It's at the center of this
I think the way it's been characterized by conservatives and Trump supporters, it's a question of liberate. Right? That was the phrase that is used in Michigan against the Democratic governor there.
And what Joe Biden tried to say in the last couple of weeks is, you can be freer if you take some public health cautions. You can rebuild the economy. You can go back to school if you take some of the precautions. The president has been much less willing to go down that road.
And I think what's interesting on this is you hear it message on the campaign trail in terms of tax rates and the like. The thing that you can't put a number on, you can say there are still 11 million people who are out of work out of the 22 million you named at the top of this program. But how do you put a price on educating your kid at the kitchen table because they can't walk into a classroom? How do you put a price on the confidence you don't have to go to the store and shop? How do you put a price on all of that? And that is where those two issues are so interconnected. And I think it's so interesting to see them separated in public perception.
Fascinating, and stand by, because we want to look at the national map, because as we keep talking about, this is an electoral college, a race to that 270. Let's go now to our elections director, Anthony Salvanto, who is at our map that we call the What Happens If map.
What happens if, Nora? I want to start everybody with the big picture, the national map as it was in 2016. I want to show you the states that President Trump is defending tonight. Now, in 2016, as everybody remembers, he famously swung a number of reliably blue Democratic states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. But this year, coming in the pre-election polling, all of those states were either toss-ups or leaning blue. So I'm going to hypothetically take those out of his column for the moment. There's a second story going on here, and that is across the Sun Belt. Coming into tonight, Arizona was a toss-up. Georgia became a toss-up. Florida always is a battleground, even North Carolina. So that subtracts from the president's 2016 map. Now, what does he have to do tonight? Well, for starters, he's got to take them back. He's got to replicate that 2016 swing, go back through Arizona, hold on to Florida. We'll be watching Georgia. We'll be watching North Carolina, which will be closing very shortly. And then to get back up over 270, maybe a Pennsylvania. That's certainly in his sights to continue flipping reliably, or what used to be reliably, Democratic states. For Joe Biden, his path also, I think, heavily dependent on the upper Midwest. He's going to try to pull back Wisconsin into the Democratic column, pull back Michigan from 2016, maybe Pennsylvania. That could get him back over. Or Joe Biden could also try to stake a claim to some of those fast-growing Sunbelt states. If he gets Georgia, North Carolina, or even Florida, maybe a more comfortable margin of victory. That's the way to watch tonight. Up through the upper Midwest and through the Sunbelt, lots of battleground.
Anthony, I want to return back to Georgia. That is a state that has closed at this hour. Let's put that board back up and tell us what you know about the state of Georgia. That is a ruby red state. And boy, Joe Biden, that campaign spent a lot of time trying to flip it blue.
They did. It is a toss-up at the moment, Nora. So what we see out of Georgia at the moment is we're waiting for votes to come in. We're waiting for votes to come in. So you don't see any votes here yet. But as they come in, I'll tell you what we're going to watch very carefully. And that is going to be the Atlanta suburbs, the area around Atlanta, because all of those counties, fast-growing metropolitan area. This is a place that has been trending towards the Democrats for the last couple of cycles. If Joe Biden is going to win Georgia, he is going to have to run up the score in metro Atlanta.
All right, and thank you, Anthony. Each of us here has a lot of data from the exit polls that we can look at and go inside there, and John's particularly good at working the computer.
Well, you know, after so much just hokum out in the world, we now have voters doing things we can count and come to real conclusions.
And get a sense of what they really want for
you get a little jumpy because you get to see what people actually think. And one of the interesting things that you and Margaret were talking about is white women with a college degree. That's a really important part of the electorate. They live in those suburbs. In Georgia, Biden leads President Trump by 1 point. Okay, in 2016, President Trump, then candidate Trump, won that group by 29 points.
Whoa.
So right now, according to the exit polls, that's a swing of 30 points. Now, these exit things change over the course of the night, but as of right now, Joe Biden leads by 1 point, and that was a group that Donald Trump won by 30.
And he really courted those women, though, saying, you know, women, please like me. I'm saving your neighborhoods. The question is saving your neighborhoods from what, number one? Number two, and I'm going to help your husbands, too. To see what year is this?
That was President Trump you're talking about.
Yes.
One of the things that Anthony was following in his polls from the minute President Trump was elected is some of those women in the suburbs were turned off by President Trump starting almost within his presidency. And the president was always trying to get them back, get them to take a second look. We certainly saw it with his convention. And we'll watch tonight whether he was able to. That's one of the key groups to look at, not just to see who's winning, but by how much.
It's so interesting because we know that women make a lot of the household decisions on the economy. The data is clear. They decide what cars to buy. They decide where to send their kids to school. They even usually buy their spouse's socks in many cases. And so in this case, when women switch back and forth, it's because they're feeling it at home. Their kids may not be able to go to school. People are getting sick, their own parents that they have to take care of. So it's one of those key demographics we're going to be watching.
And women are paying the higher price, too, during this pandemic.
Women have lost 4 times as many jobs as men in the month of September. I mean, this has been a female-led recession, the first in our country's history. So to your point, it's not just about their husbands' jobs. Their jobs have been lost.
And the other big storyline that we are covering tonight is control of the United States Senate. So many competitive Senate races this year. Let's bring in CBS's chief congressional correspondent.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Thank you for joining us on Election Day 2020. It's the final day to vote during this historic presidential race that is unfolding amid a global pandemic. As of 7 p.m. Eastern, polls are now closed in 6 states, including Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, Vermont, and Virginia. More than 101 million Americans cast their ballots early. That's over 73% of the total number of votes cast in the 2016 general election. Today's turnout is expected to be in the tens of millions. As the nation waits to see which candidate will get to 270 electoral votes, it is possible there may not be a clear winner announced on election night. That's due to record voting by mail. Some states are not legally allowed to start counting those ballots until Election Day. President Trump did not hit the campaign trail today after holding 5 rallies in 4 states Monday. Instead, Mr. Trump visited the Republican Party's office in Arlington, Virginia. He thanked staff for their work and predicted a, quote, great night. The president plans to host a post-election party inside the White House later tonight. Around 400 guests are invited. Meanwhile, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden closed out his campaign in the critical state of Pennsylvania. He held voter mobilization events in Scranton and Philadelphia. Biden will watch the election results come in from his home in Delaware. He's expected to address the nation at some point this evening. For more, let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns, Molly Hooper, and Antoine Seawright. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter with us from Pennsylvania. Molly is a CBSN political contributor joining us from Arlington, Virginia. And Antoine is a CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist. He joins us from Columbia, South Carolina. Welcome. I'm so excited to see you all. I wish we could all be crowded around this table, but it is great to see you any way we can. So, Molly, let's start with you. The big question: when will we know the results of the 2020 election? And is it unusual to not know who won on election night?
Well, here's the thing. When will we know? When's there going to be a vaccine to the coronavirus? I'm just kidding. It's unclear when we will know because nearly half of the states have different ways that they get to count and process, or different dates by which they have to count and process mail-in ballots. So with that being said, some of these states can't even start processing the mail-in ballots until today, or the next few days. So that means it's going to take a little bit longer than it has in the past. We're so used to, as Americans, we're so used to sort of this instant gratification, election night, results coming in, and the decisions being made. But that just doesn't. It's not going to happen tonight. And this isn't that unusual when it comes to at least congressional races. I know in 2018 there were a number of congressional races that weren't called until weeks after the final counting because of the mail-in ballots. So I think that what's going to be interesting is to watch how both candidates handle that issue. When do you go out and what do you say to your supporters and others at the end of this night? I just think that it's going to be okay, but it might take a few more days than we're used to.
Yeah, patience is the watchword. Caitlin, one of the places where we know voting results will be delayed is North Carolina. What more can you tell us about that?
In North Carolina, a key battleground state that just ruled about 6 precincts will be extended about 40 minutes or up to 40 minutes because of original delays earlier today. That's significant because, as we know, there is an intense focus on Election Day voting for the president. If precincts have issues, being able to extend that opportunity for voters to cast their ballots. North Carolina, a key state, of course. It's a state that former President Obama won in 2008. Mitt Romney won it in 2012. Trump won it in 2016. But this time around, it is a big battleground, not only on the presidential race, but in a key Senate race as well. So not only has the president been campaigning there, but the Biden team has been there as well. Joe Biden on the ground in North Carolina campaigning, as well as Kamala Harris. So this is a big state to watch tonight. These delays shouldn't hold up results that much, however. It would be about till 8:15 p.m. North Carolina is a state that a lot of people are watching kind of as a bellwether tonight. If Joe Biden is able to win North Carolina tonight, that really puts him on the path to those 270 electoral votes that blocks off a path for the president. So that's why all eyes are on North Carolina, because that is one state where we could actually get some results tonight.
Well, Antoine, Joe Biden spent the last 3 days in Pennsylvania. What does his campaign see as its best path to victory?
Well, I traditionally believe or subscribe to this idea that the road to heaven and the White House runs through South Carolina. However, I think Joe Biden needed to get his political passport stamped by places that Hillary Clinton did not win in 2016. And that includes Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, North Carolina, and now we've expanded the battlefield, and you can include Arizona and places like Florida. Here's what I know. There are states that Trump won in 16 that Democrats were able to win in 18. Those will look very good tonight for Joe Biden. There are also states like Iowa and Georgia that have a U.S. Senate race on the ballot that's going to drive turnout like we've never seen before. I think that well positions Joe Biden. Conventional wisdom would tell us that we should look at geographics. However, we are not living in conventional times, and so we have to take demographics, add demographics into the equation. African-American turnout is high. Latino turnout seems to be high from some of the early vote numbers. This will be the first time in American history, Lane, where you have 30 million eligible African-American voters, 32 million eligible Latino voters, and with so many down ballot races, with so much money being poured into voter engagement and voter turnout, I think Joe Biden has a pathway. Here's the other key point. There are states like Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, where the early vote numbers are so strong, leaning towards the Democrats, that Donald Trump has to overperform what he did in 2016 in order to make up the margin. For instance, in a place like Michigan, I think he literally has to have a 62% performance over what he did in 2016 to catch up to some of the margins. I think that bodes well for Joe Biden. However, we cannot call the race until we run through the tape, and so there's still some time left because people are still voting.
Well, Caitlin, earlier today, President Trump was asked if he has prepared either an acceptance or a concession speech. Here's his response. All right, I'm not sure if we have that tape, control room.
I'm not thinking about concession speech or acceptance speech yet. Hopefully, we'll be only doing one of those two. And, winning is easy. Losing is never easy.
All right, so Caitlin, what are the president's must-win states?
Well, the president's path to those 270 electoral votes is much more narrow than it is for Joe Biden. He basically has to keep all the states that he won in 2016 and prevent Joe Biden from cutting into any of his margins. So a couple of key states that I'm watching for tonight that can kind of tell us where this race is going. Florida, of course, is one to watch. It's always a really close battleground, but Florida is important because we've been reporting on all of the issues a lot of these states are likely going to have and reporting the results and the delays that will ensue. Florida actually kind of has it together. They have been able to process ballots and actually tabulate them weeks before Election Day. And officials that we have talked to when we were on the ground there recently said that they expect results on Election night. So if the president is able to win Florida, he's able to stay in this race. If Biden wins Florida, that really cuts off the president's path to victory. You're also looking at states like Georgia, which is labeled in our CBS News exit polling data as a toss-up. That is a key state, as Antoine mentioned. There's two key Senate races there as well. Georgia, North Carolina will be able to give us a good indication of where this race goes. Again, states that the president needs to hold, in addition to holding those states in the Midwest where we see in polling that Biden has a lead. We're also keeping a close eye on Arizona, another state that has been increasingly becoming a battleground. President Trump won it by just 3 points in 2016. Democrats have been competing there. Another state as well that has been processing ballots before Election Day. That's kind of the key here to know. States that have been able to process those ballots and maybe get those results in on time compared to those like where I am and here in Pennsylvania that just might take a while.
Antoine, very quickly here, I want to turn to the exit polls. When voters were asked about the most important issues, the economy was first and racial inequality was second. I know that you've been out talking to Democratic voters across the country. Help us understand what is behind that ranking.
Well, I think that what people seem to forget that we're living through the worst pandemic since 1918 that's caused some of the worst economic challenges since 1932. Yet add on to that social unrest like we have not seen and other than in the days of my sharecropping grandparents. And so I'm not surprised by the results. Keep in mind the response to this coronavirus lays solely at the feet of Donald Trump, and people know that. Businesses are closing down, foreclosures are happening, evictions, and all that. That's what people think about when the economy. Forget about trying to make ends meet. There's so many families around this country who are putting two ends together, hoping they meet, and that's why you get the response that you get.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Molly Hooper, and Antoine Seawright, thank you all so much. Let's turn now to our Lana Zak for the latest on exit polls. She's at the board. Lana, what can you tell us?
Hey there, Elaine. As I told you before, overwhelmingly, we are seeing that Americans who are turning out are saying that the economy is their number one issue. So I want to go a little bit deeper into that with you. Take a look at what voters said when it comes to their own financial family situation 4 years ago versus today. 40% say that they're better today. About an equal number say that they're about the same. Only 20% of voters say that they are actually worse off. Now, I also want to go a little bit deeper into Georgia because those exit polls just closed. The condition of the national economy among Georgia voters very much mirrors what we're seeing on a national stage, which is interesting given that Georgia is historically a very red state. 13% say it's excellent, 37% say it's good. Split that right in half, and you see that it's about 50-50. Now, when people are saying that the economy is good, overwhelmingly, as we can expect, in Georgia, 79% of those voters are turning out for President Trump. By contrast, voters who think that the economy is in tough shape in Georgia say overwhelmingly that they are going for Biden, 81%. Now, there's one other thing that's obviously going to be very important when we're talking about Georgia voters, and that is the demographics. White, Black, Latino, Asian, and other. The Biden campaign has been working so hard, as you know, Elaine, to try and turn out those Black voters. And when it comes to white voters, overwhelmingly, 68% are voting for Trump. But when it comes to Black voters, they're 88% for Biden. So that's why you can see in all of these things, Elaine, Georgia is still too close to call because there's a lot of voters that are really split right down the middle, Elaine.
Lana Zak, thank you. We'll be checking in with you throughout the night. Coming up after the break, more than 101 million Americans cast their ballots ahead of Election Day. We take a look at how the record turnout could impact when we see results. You're streaming our special election night coverage.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Do you think that the president has the authority to send in active duty troops?
Face the questions you want answered.
Did the CDC let the American people down? Tell me about the decision. When was it made? Who made it? What is the next area that you are concerned about? What does that mean for the risk of reinfection here in the United States?
You bring up a very good point, Margaret.
Margaret, that's a great question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
Welcome back to CBS News election headquarters in Times Square. We're coming up on 7:30 in the East in what is shaping up to be a nail-biter of a presidential election. In just a few seconds, the polls will close in Ohio and most of North Carolina. Those are two of our notable 9 states that are key to this election, as well as West Virginia. President Obama won North Carolina, remember, in 2008 by just a sliver. But since then, it has voted with the Republicans. Well, tonight, the Biden campaign hoping that the Tar Heel states changing demographics will give them a win in the South. And with 4.5 million people voting early in North Carolina, we are expecting about 80% of the vote to be released soon, just right after the poll closing, so we can talk about what we're learning there. All right, it is just about 7:30 in the East, and we're about to get those results in several of the states. Stand by. They're coming in just this second. CBS News can characterize that North Carolina and Ohio are toss-ups. No clear leader in either of those battleground states at this hour. West Virginia, however, is leaning toward President Trump. There we have it. Polls have now closed in 9 states across America. Neither candidate has any electoral votes in that race to 270 because it is still very early in the counting. There's some stuff to talk about with Florida, and I want to let everybody know we are going to talk about that with Florida in just a second because I want to stand by. But just because North Carolina has just closed, Anthony Salvanto wants to dive into North Carolina for us because it's really interesting. Anthony?
Nora, when we look at North Carolina tonight, there is one big number, as it will be in many states, and it's going to be this, the expected vote, 5.9 million. Now, they haven't been counted yet, but we're watching this because perhaps as much as 80% of it has been cast early. And what I can tell you from our exit polls today and the exit polls we did among voters who were casting ballots early, Joe Biden has a significant lead among the early ballots cast. But today, Republicans have been voting in larger numbers. So the question is going to be, can Republicans catch up, make up that lead that the Democrats and Joe Biden built up in the early vote as this heads for what could be record turnout, Nora? And then when we talk about North Carolina, so much of the focus is going to be in the Raleigh-Durham area here, where we're going to look and we're going to have a lot of, if Joe Biden is doing well, him running up the score, trying to hit very large vote margins in urban areas, in suburban areas that have been trending towards the Democrats over recent cycles. And if that can offset what we expect from President Trump in and across rural areas where his base is strongest.
Right, Anthony, thank you. You know, North Carolina, that's a state that Republicans haven't had to worry about for a long time. And the Biden-Harris campaign really making a big play for that state.
One of the reasons we're going to have numbers from North Carolina is they've been counting them for a while. So this early vote, 4.5 million voters voted early in North Carolina. That's a great deal more than, it's about 50% more than voted early in 2016. And they've been counting them so that when they release them, they've already been tabulated over the last many days. That's why we're going to get that big glug of votes when they report.
And that state's so important, Gail. There were reports today of voter suppression.
Yes, one of our producers talked to somebody from the NAACP, the chapter in Charlotte, said that she had received several calls from voters who said, we're being told that we don't have to vote until November 4th. Is that true? Well, of course, absolutely it's not true, but they were very concerned, so they are investigating there. Talked to a community organizer there who had also heard those kind of stories. He had gone to 8 different counties and was taking along PPE and giving people gas money if they needed to go. He said they're thinking we'll count the ballots tonight and hopefully count our blessings in the morning. We will see. That's assuming if it goes that way they want it to.
The state got a lot of attention from both campaigns. The president was there frequently in the past week. Biden sent his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, there just today to try to rally last-minute support. One of the things will be interesting to watch, Cumberland County, Fayetteville area. One of the things Joe Biden talked a lot about since the summer is that report that the president had called members of the military losers and suckers. That can resonate in a place like Cumberland County. 50,000 members of the military. That kind of conversation, while it was everywhere, really can resonate in key parts of a state, and that's one place to watch.
And Nora, just to come back to one of the themes that we have highlighted, white women with college degrees. If you look at that breakdown of the data that CBS is crunching, they are swinging Biden's way substantially. He has an 11-point edge with them. This is a demographic that Trump took by 8 points in 2016. So the trend is there. We don't obviously have a call, but this is a trend.
So that's true in Georgia and now North Carolina?
Yes. So there's a 19-point swing towards Biden in North Carolina and a 22-point swing in Georgia. I had it a little high, so it's 22 in Georgia and 19 in North Carolina. So that's one of the things to watch tonight.
I think that's one of the storylines developing tonight, the power of women and this election, just as, of course, it's the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. Will women be the deciding factors in this election about who is the next president of the United States? I want to just check in quickly with CBS's Chris Van Cleve. He is in Raleigh, North Carolina, where some polling places are actually staying open later than originally planned. Chris?
That's correct, Nora. While the polls closed for most of North Carolina at 7:30, there are 10 polling places that were given additional time, up to 45 extra minutes, because of either technical glitches or human error that delayed voting today. Now, that's not unusual. This happens in every election. But per North Carolina policy, they don't release any results until every single poll has closed. So we won't get any of that data that Anthony was talking about until sometime after 8:15. We know that more than 4.5 million people voted early, so it's going to be a lot of information about how people voted. The Board of Elections here believes that they'll be able to count 97% or more of the total votes cast sometime tonight. Nora?
All right, Chris Van Cleve, thank you. Want to give everybody stay tuned. We've got some new information coming in from Florida. We're going to get to that in just a second. It's really interesting. Let's check in first, though, with Major Garrett on what made people vote the way they did today in North Carolina. Major?
So picking up on the conversation just at the table about suburban women, I'm going to give you that demographic group in 2 battleground states. Let's start in North Carolina. I'm going to start telling you this story with looking at what happened with suburban women in 2016. Donald Trump carried them 54 to 44. What is going on with suburban women in North Carolina in 2020? Donald Trump 55, Joe Biden 44. Almost exactly the same ratio. But let's go to Ohio, another battleground state, and it's a completely different story, though it's the same demographic group. 2016, Trump carries at 52 to 43 over Hillary Clinton. What is going on in this election? Joe Biden 53, Donald Trump 47. So in North Carolina, things are almost exactly the same as they were in 2016, but in Ohio, there is a sizable shift, at least among suburban women, away from Trump and toward Joe Biden.
You know, I've heard some of these women say, Major, yeah, we're a little disturbed by he's unpresidential and maybe his manners aren't so good, but he's very good on the economy. And I think other people say, but there's more to this country than just the economy.
Right. And what you're seeing here is one thing I think the exit polls will remind us. You can have the same demographic group, but in different states come to different conclusions. Right. In North Carolina, they're basically where they were 4 years ago. For them, nothing really changed, at least in terms of their preference. But in Ohio, at least, it appears that it has.
John? You were going to say
well, no, it's okay.
I know what you're going because I teased it and I said we would go there, and so we're going to go there.
All right. We're going to go there. Let's go there.
Talk about Florida.
We're going to you.
I love how
I know you so well. I can read your mind.
So in Florida, we're getting lots and lots of vote in, and it's quite interesting. Why are we getting lots of vote in? There's been a lot of early vote. Yeah. So we're getting these puzzle pieces. These are for real puzzle pieces. So Miami-Dade, which is the largest county, 84% of the vote is in. Joe Biden is only up by 9 points. Hillary Clinton won that by 29 points. In this race, you've got to win and do well in your areas. That number is not a great number for Joe Biden.
And look at the overall number here, how it keeps going back and forth. 40.0 to 49.1. Just a few minutes ago, the president had a slight lead. It could be that kind of night in Florida again. And remember, even if the Biden campaign doesn't do as well in South Florida, they have been working to run up the numbers in Central Florida, places like Orlando and Tampa. And I know there's been a lot of concern placed on the Villages, for example, an area of the state with senior citizens.
All of that is coming up. All of that is coming up. We've got it for you coming up. The newest information is coming in from South Florida. We'll talk to 2 campaign insiders, too, about how they're feeling about the state of the race. So many votes coming in. So exciting. CBS News 2020, America Decides. We will be right back.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Do you think that the president has the authority to send in active duty troops?
Face the questions you want answered.
Did the CDC let the American people down? Tell me about the decision. When was it made? Who made it? What is the next area that you are concerned about? What does that mean for the risk of reinfection here in the United States?
You bring up a very good point, Margaret.
Margaret, that's a great question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
More than 100 million ballots were submitted before polls opened on Election Day. That's more than 73% of the total votes counted in the 2016 presidential election. A federal judge ordered the U.S. Postal Service to sweep facilities Tuesday for any remaining mail-in ballots. It comes amid growing concerns that some votes may not make it to election officials in time to be counted. The sweeps were ordered in 12 jurisdictions, including the battleground states of Arizona, Georgia, Texas, Florida, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. For more, let's bring in Mindy Finn. She is the CEO of Citizen Data, a political data firm. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, as we mentioned, more than 100 million ballots were cast before Election Day, and you also tweeted earlier that a majority of votes have been cast already in many states. How big of a role are early votes going to play this year?
Yeah, this has been a Herculean effort. 7 months ago, it wasn't clear how election officials would run an election amid a pandemic. And so many, obviously, as we know, adapted their policies to allow no excuse absentee voting and expanded early voting. In the Sun Belt in particular, and I'm talking about among the swing states, Texas, Florida, North Carolina, and Georgia, you can expect that as much as 80% or more in some of those states, voters will have cast their ballots prior to Election Day, to the point where this notion of Election Day being kind of the big day where everyone shows up to the polls is certainly kind of outdated when it comes to this election. In Texas, it may be 85%, in Florida, 85% who cast their ballots before Election Day. So really, we've had more of an election month than an election day. And it'll, and because each of these states count differently, it will also change how results are reported tonight.
Well, there appears to be a partisan split between early voters and Election Day voters. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so historically, when mail voting was just a small minority of the vote in most states, except for the states that have moved to a more universal vote by mail system, in most states it was very small. In Pennsylvania, it was 4%, for example. And when it was that small amount of the vote, you really saw very little partisan difference with vote by mail. Military and overseas voters used absentee. That's what it was for. Or sometimes elderly or infirm, voters. There was all kinds of reasons, but it was still a small amount of the vote. So when it was expanded this year, earlier when we started tracking it kind of in July, June and July, of those who were planning to vote by mail or absentee, depending on how it's classified in their state, there wasn't that big of a partisan gap in some of these states. But over this last several months, particularly as the president and others have sought to kind of undermine or polarize vote by mail as something that shouldn't be trusted, what we see now is a very significant partisan gap where Democrats in many of these states are more likely to vote absentee. They cast absentee ballots or mail ballots at a 2-to-1. The early vote, there was kind of less partisan difference, but still favored Democrats. And then on the Election Day vote, we can expect that Election Day that Republicans are likely to vote on Election Day 2-to-1 to Democrats.
Well, some states did not start counting early and mail-in ballots until this morning. How might that impact when we get results?
Yeah, that's right. So, there are some states that can count and process prior to Election Day. And in those states, those absentee or early votes will be the first ones we're likely to see in, but they'll kind of come in tandem with the Election Day votes, and you won't see that much distinction. And that's places like Florida and North Carolina. But in the other states, in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania in particular, because they were not allowed to process any of those votes until 7 o'clock this morning, it will take several days, or could take up to several days. Pennsylvania in particular, when we talk about vote counting, we'll call it kind of the problem child, because there in many counties, more than a dozen counties, they didn't necessarily guarantee that they would start counting this morning. They wanted to focus on the Election Day vote and not even start counting those absentees until tomorrow morning. And given the stark partisan difference in the mail/absentee vote and the Election Day vote, we could see, particularly in Pennsylvania, a shift in who appears to have won that state at the presidential level over the next several days. Not to mention, there are obviously all the House races that could have a significant impact on, not just the individual House races in that state, but also how big of a gain, Democrats who are expected to gain in the House, how big of a gain they actually end up with.
Well, there have been battles over how much time states have to count their ballots. Remind us, what are both sides in these fights arguing?
Yeah, well, first of all, I come from a place where I think the idea that every eligible voter should have an opportunity to vote, that we should make it accessible, and that they should have confidence that their vote will be counted, whether it comes by mail or in person on our election day. I think that shouldn't be partisan. That should be something we all agree to. But during this election in particular, we do really see, some partisan battles for this, where Republicans have been arguing that only absentee ballots that come in by election day should actually be counted, as opposed to those that are postmarked by election day. And then, it may take the Postal Service some time to actually deliver those to election officials. In Pennsylvania, the legislature passed a rule that ballots that come in that are not in the secrecy envelope or not properly placed in the right envelope should just automatically be thrown out. In past elections, those were actually accepted. These are the kinds of things, there's been some laws passed to allow voters to what's called cure their ballots, which is that if there is an issue with the signature not matching or something not going in the right envelope, and it comes in early enough that election officials can alert that voter, and that voter can have the opportunity to correct that ballot so that it can be counted. And many states actually did adopt that policy. So that's what they're voting on. I mean, the president, of course, has continued to say he doesn't think anything should be counted that comes in after Election Day. That's just not the rules. So, I mean, even looking at Pennsylvania, the law in the books right now is that a ballot must be postmarked by, Election Day, 8 p.m. on election night, or dropped in out of a local office by election night. But it has up until November 6th to be received, because it's not a voter's responsibility to have that ballot go through the postal system and be delivered. They can't control whether that takes 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, or 6 days. And so in Pennsylvania, they're allowing 3 days past that, past Election Day, past that deadline for when a ballot must be postmarked. So these are actually the things that are battled over. I think it's been a real education for many voters this election to understand that these laws that often are in the domain of the legislature have a real impact on voting rights. They have a real impact on whose vote is allowed to count. And so one, I think, silver lining in this election, despite some of the partisan rancor over these election rules, is that there's greater understanding about the impact that they have. And I think frankly, I think many voters will start to kind of vote on these issues. They'll want to vote for those who are respecting their vote and their voice.
Well, the president says that ballots should not be counted beyond election night. He's also claimed that voting by mail could lead to fraud. Remind us of the reality, what the evidence has or has not shown when it comes to this notion of widespread voter fraud. Is that something Americans should be worried about, particularly if there are delays, or I hate to call them delays because, as others have pointed out, they're not necessarily delays. They are just the time that it takes to count a number of ballots that is an unusual number compared to years past.
Yeah, so, when it comes to fraud, both parties have looked at this. Republicans have certainly spent time studying and looking for incidents of voter fraud and trying to prove this idea that there's a wide prevalence of voter fraud. The Conservative Heritage Foundation issued a landmark report on this and found little to no incidents of voter fraud. It is incredibly, incredibly rare. And in the cases that it did kind of occur, it wasn't in a voter committing fraud. It was a bad actor, kind of exploiting voters. And in almost all of those cases, they were discovered and rooted out. People aren't perfect. There's always going to be some incidents, but it is very, very uncommon. Even Republican super lawyer Ben Ginsburg, a former colleague of mine, who worked for 30 plus years with, Republican presidential campaigns and the Republican National Committee on Election Law, was involved in the 2000 recount, had an op-ed this week where he said that Republicans looking for voter fraud, it was like them looking for the Loch Ness monster. They keep looking for it and they're just not going to find it. So this is it's misinformation to say that mail ballots are rife with fraud. It's just not the case. And it's unfortunate that, a significant percentage of voters have believed that misinformation. We've done research on this, and over the last few months, there's been a steady uptick in the number of voters who are concerned that mail ballots are rife with fraud. And frankly, it's more Republicans who've been concerned about that, which is why I think you see less of them using mail ballots this time, even if they may have preferred to do so. And instead, they're showing up on Election Day. So it just absolutely, just isn't true when it comes to the accusations about voter fraud.
All right, Mindy Finn. Thank you very much, Mindy. And CBS News projects that President Trump has won Indiana and that Joe Biden has won Vermont. And we want to show you now those graphics that show the number of electoral votes for Joe Biden now with the Vermont projection, 3 electoral votes. And in the president's column, we now have Indiana with its 11 electoral votes. So for those of you continuing to watch, obviously that magic number to hit is 270. There you see it. The CBS News projection that Donald Trump wins Indiana with 11 electoral votes there. And you see the CBS News projection that Joe Biden wins Vermont with 3 electoral votes for him. We'll continue, of course, to bring you any results just as soon as they come in. Now, the pandemic has led to an election season unlike any other before it in the U.S. Millions of Americans voted in person today, and many polling locations operated with special health safety protocols in place. It is the first time that public health experts have issued such guidelines to help voters safely navigate an election. For more, I want to bring in Jessica Brown. She is a senior advisor for We Can Vote, a nonpartisan coalition focused on making sure the 2020 election is safe, secure, and successful in the face of the pandemic. Jessica, thanks very much for being with us. Some of the work that your organization does is to advise voters on how to protect themselves and their communities from the spread of COVID-19. How many people have benefited from this initiative?
We've reached millions of Americans with our digital ads, with our print guides, and really the message was that you have safe and healthy voting options this year, whether it was casting your ballot by mail and returning it to a secure drop box, or whether that was going to vote in person and maintaining physical distance, wearing a mask, washing your hands. People had so many more safe and healthy voting options this year, and we saw that Americans really took advantage of these options. Absolutely incredible that we've seen over 100 million Americans vote early, and that made it possible for so many more millions of Americans to vote safely in person on Election Day. So this was really a huge success and something that, a number of months ago when we saw states struggling with some of their primaries when they didn't have as much time to prepare is a major turnaround, and the election officials and public health officials have done an incredible job in having safe voting experiences.
Well, what were the challenges involved in the process, and how did people receive these health voting advisories?
Some of the challenges were that the systems that we were trying to expand, these are things that usually election officials might take a number of cycles to implement, and they had to do it within a number of months. So it was really the clock was working against us the entire time. But what was really amazing was to see the public health officials and election officials working closely together to figure out how do you have safe polling locations where people could be spaced apart? How do you ensure enough protective gear and masks and hand sanitizer for polling locations? What are the things that need to go into educating the public about the new options available to them? So these were all things that people had to work very quickly to figure out, and really saw an amazing effort from public health officials and election experts to let people know that they did have safe and healthy voting options.
Well, have you seen any in-person voters report problems today?
Today, I think, was a great sign that the system was working as intended. Because so many more millions of Americans voted early, it meant that we lessened the pressure on Election Day. And that was always the concern, because the election is one of America's biggest public events. And so we knew that we had to decompress the Election Day and make sure that we were not cramming all of these millions of Americans into one day. And so what we saw was, because so many millions of Americans have voted early, a lot of polling locations reported little lines, safe, healthy voting places. And this was, again, really a great success, and one that we also just saw so many Americans step up. So, we have voted through 2 world wars, through the Great Depression, through the 1918 pandemic, and we did it again this year, and we had a really safe, secure, and successful election.
Well, Jessica, the CDC issued new guidance that says people who test positive for coronavirus can still vote in person. What do you make of that move?
I think one of the big principles of this election is that people should not have to choose between their health and their voice in our democracy. And so we have to make sure that no matter what, that people can preserve their right to vote, and that they can do it in a way that protects themselves and their community. And that's exactly what we saw Americans do. So election officials were incredibly innovative in getting people to vote in different ways, whether that was through expanded curbside voting, drive-through voting, being able to cast an emergency ballot. They did give options for people who were sick or who were potentially exposed, and this makes sure that everybody can continue to exercise their right to vote.
All right. Well, Jessica Brown, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Lana Zak is at the board. Lana, what's the latest?
Hey there, Elaine. I've been looking pretty deeply into some of these demographic numbers. We've been talking a lot about women and male voters and how they're doing. Overall, nationally, there's some good news for the Biden campaign on that. He's up 3 points over Hillary Clinton comparatively. And I want to take you deeper into Ohio, which is one of those battleground states that just closed. So you see women voters in Ohio going to Biden, 52 compared to Trump at 47. And when it comes to white women, which you and the panel have been talking about a lot, white women still favoring Trump over Biden. But again, his numbers are trending better with white women than Hillary Clinton in the last presidential campaign. One of the things that's really interesting is how men are voting, though, Elaine. This is starting to emerge. These are our nationwide polls. Men in the U.S., 49% going for Biden, 48% for Trump. Neck and neck, obviously, but that's still up over what we saw in the last election. In fact, when it comes to men, this is 8 points higher than Hillary Clinton did. And when it comes to white men, Biden still trailing the president. But again, those numbers are up 10 points over Hillary Clinton. Elaine.
All right, Lana Zak, thank you. We'll be checking in with you throughout the night. Exit polls are about to close in more states across the country. We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, it's a CBS News special report, America Decides. Stay with us. You're streaming election night coverage on CBSN.
You're looking live at Times Square in New York City. And as America Decides, welcome again to our CBS News election night headquarters here at the crossroads of the country. I'm Norah O'Donnell, and it's almost 8 o'clock in the east, 5 o'clock in the west, and this is a big hour. The polls are about to be closed in half of the states across America, and that includes 2 that we are laser focused on this hour, Florida and Pennsylvania. They are part of what we're calling our notable 9 tonight, those states that could decide the election and determine who becomes president of the United States. All all roads to the White House go through Florida, especially for President Trump. It is his newly adopted home state. Florida, you remember, infamous for that 2000 election, but it could offer an early look tonight about who occupies the White House in 2021. And we have some projections at this hour. CBS News can characterize that Florida is a toss-up. Pennsylvania also a toss-up at this hour. Let's get to the rest of the states that have closed at this hour. CBS News can project that President Trump has won the state of Oklahoma. Joe Biden is the winner in the District of Columbia, his home state of Delaware, and Massachusetts. CBS News can now categorize these races as well. Alabama, Mississippi, Missouri, and Tennessee all leaning toward Trump. Maryland, New Jersey, Connecticut, Illinois, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Maine are all leaning toward Biden. Remember, this is a race to 270 electoral votes, and at this early hour, CBS News estimates that Joe Biden has 20, President Trump 18, still early in the night. Let's talk about these two states that we're looking at, Ed. Pennsylvania and Florida, each campaign sees them differently.
Absolutely. The Biden team calls Pennsylvania the cornerstone of their path to 270, one that solidifies their ability to win this contest. They have other ways to do it without Pennsylvania, but believe that is the best shot. Florida, if Biden is able to pull it off, and that is questionable as we see data continuing to come in, would be the capstone, the one that completely makes it impossible for the president to win. So that's why you've seen so much attention by the former vice president focused on Pennsylvania, especially since the weekend.
And as we've seen both of the candidates in Pennsylvania so often, but just a reminder, Pennsylvania is one of those states, including those in the upper Midwest, that said, wait, we're not going to count those absentee ballots until today. And so it could be a state, according to their own Secretary of State, we may not have the full results until later this week.
Right. That's right. So Pennsylvania has the slow counting system for what comes in early, but unlike Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina, which have a lot of early votes, they don't have a lot of early votes. It's a lot of in-day voting in Pennsylvania, so it's going to be a long time in Pennsylvania. But just because we're all obsessed with Florida, because it's the route to the president has to win Florida. Yeah. We're going to be getting votes that Ryan Priebus was talking about in that western panhandle part of Florida where the president's very strong.
And speaking about Florida, that state that you point out that President Trump has to win, Major Garrett has some new information from the exit polls. Major?
That's right, Nora and team. And the reason we do exit polls this way is we don't report state-specific exit polls until the polls have closed. That's why we've been holding back. I know you've been energetic over there. Where's the Florida data, Major? I've got it for you now. Two demographic groups to come, seniors and Latinos. Let's start with seniors, meaning voters over the age 65. Here's what it was in 2016. Donald Trump carried that, as you can see, by 17 points. What is going on in this election with voters over age 65? Trump 52, Biden 47. That is a 17-point margin in 2016, shrinking to a 5-point margin in 2020 among those voters. Now let's look at Latinos. Again, I'll reset the clock to 2016. Latino voters, Hillary Clinton 62, Donald Trump 35. What does the Latino vote look like now? Joe Biden 53, Donald Trump 45. So Donald Trump is performing a little bit better with Latino voters. The composition of the electorate in this election 2020 for Latino voters about the same as it was in 2016, but it is larger among those age 65 and older. How much larger? Good question. 31% this time, 26% in 2016.
And so that means what about those older Latinos?
So older voters and Latinos. Sorry. So Latinos about the same size composition, 18% in both years, 18, 19%, 2016, 2020. But the senior vote is larger, 31% this time versus 26% in 2016, and Joe Biden is doing better than Hillary Clinton did with that particular demographic.
And the economy, one of the messages resonating with seniors in Florida.
The economy, but also the virus.
Yeah,
how safe am I?
Isn't COVID resonating?
How safe am I? How safe is my family? How safe are the people of my age group, maybe that don't live in Florida but are somewhere else?
Major, I can't go see my grandchildren, the seniors are saying.
Precisely.
Yeah, it's been a problem.
That's a dynamic to keep an eye on in Florida.
If Joe Biden wants to win the White House, he's got to pull off some of those Sun Belt states that we have been talking about where the Latino vote is strong. We want to bring in CBS News contributor Maria Elena Salinas. She's widely recognized as the voice of Hispanic America, and we're lucky to have her analysis. Maria?
Thank you very much, Nora. You know, why is the president doing better with Latinos in Florida? Well, a lot is due to Cuban-American voters who are coming out in support of Trump, as Major just said. The president's law and order and anti-socialism messages appear to be resonating with Cuban voters and also from voters from countries like Venezuela, Nicaragua, among others. Now, Biden is doing better with Puerto Ricans. That is the second largest Latino voting bloc in the state. CBS News exit polls show that they're supporting Biden by nearly 40 percentage points. Tens of thousands of Puerto Ricans, as we know, moved to Florida after Hurricane Maria, and many of them were just unhappy with the federal government's response. What we have to watch in Florida is the I-4 corridor that includes Tampa and Orlando. There's a large number of Boricuas there. But, you know, we also need to watch the Latino vote all over the country tonight. This year, 32 million Latinos are eligible to vote. We'll be watching the Latino vote, the Latino youth vote in particular. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. A Latino turns voting age every 30 seconds in this country. That means that about 800,000 to 1 million Latinos are added to the voter pool each year, while 2 million baby boomers die. So we're going to keep a close eye to these battleground states that may be tipped by this demographic, by Latinos.
Maria.
One is Florida, of course. The other one is Texas, Arizona, and Nevada, where Latinos make up more than 20% of the electorate. Let's see if Joe Biden was successful in getting them out to vote.
Maria, stand by. I think Ed has a question for you.
Maria Elena, great to be with you tonight. You know, we've heard the president for almost 4 years talk about how Joe Biden and Democrats would enact socialist policies in this country. To a lot of Americans, that kind of goes over their head. But remind us why that resonates so much in South Florida and why it could be affecting Biden's chances tonight.
Well, you know, that has been a message throughout with Cuban Americans. It has resonated with Cuban Americans. But this time the message was much stronger. There was a lot of disinformation in radio stations in Miami, in Spanish language media there. And they really scared people into socialism, and especially now Venezuelans. Venezuelans are only 2% of the vote, the Latino vote. However, they are coming out in larger numbers. So it really is the turnout that is being effective. You also have Central Americans. You also have Colombians. So that's why it's resonating so much. Another reason, besides the anti-socialism message, is the violence. A lot of people fear the violence. So law and order is also a huge issue for them.
All right, Maria Elena, as we continue to track the Latino vote, thank you. CBS News can project that President Trump has won the state of Kentucky. Another call as he puts some more electoral votes on the board. Not a surprise there. And we'll check in with what's going on in that Senate race in Kentucky. A big one in a moment because, of course, the Senate Majority Leader also on the ballot. All right, coming up, we'll check in with Manuel Bojorquez. He's in Florida. The latest on the vote there. You're watching CBS News 2020, America Decides.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Do you think that the president has the authority to send in active duty troops?
Face the questions you want answered.
Did the CDC let the American people down? Tell me about the decision. When was it made? Who made it? What is the next area that you are concerned about? What does that mean for the risk of reinfection here in the United States?
You bring up a very good point, Margaret.
Margaret, that's a great question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
Boom. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
director and survey guru, Anthony Salvanto. Hi, Anthony.
This is about as tight as it gets in Florida right now. At the decision desk, we are tracking a neck-and-neck race in Florida. But I want to zoom in on one county in particular, and that's Miami-Dade. Now, in Florida, Democrats rely on Miami-Dade to run up a large margin, to win by a great deal. So you see it right now, Biden at 53.9%. Okay, looks like he's winning. But if I show you the history of Miami-Dade, back in 2016, Hillary Clinton, even though she lost the state, did better in Miami-Dade. So Biden seems to be running behind that at the moment. However, I want to show you the number of votes that we expect in Miami-Dade. And here we see that 86% is in, and the expected vote is actually, we think, going to surpass 2016 turnout. So the question we're asking is, can Joe Biden win the state, at least with Miami, with a larger slice? Does he need a larger slice of a larger pie down in Miami? Or if turnout is large, can he win with a smaller slice of a larger pie of votes down there? That's one of the things that we're keeping an eye on, among others, here in Florida, which is neck and neck, Nora.
Well, you know which county I'm going to ask about next, yes. Don't you?
Let me guess. We're going to the Villages.
We're going to the Villages.
We're talking Sumter County. Okay, and we're talking about Donald Trump having a lead. Now, the Villages is here, but what we're really talking about is the senior vote in Florida, because there's been so important, and in our pre-election polling as well as in the exit polls, you started to see Joe Biden getting into Donald Trump's margins with seniors, which is obviously a critical voting bloc. Now, in Sumter County right now, you do see the president with the lead. If I show you the history, Joe Biden up, just a tick, a couple of points better than Hillary Clinton did. So pretty much even right there. And that's one of the key things we'll be keeping an eye on tonight, Nora.
Yes.
It's Florida's friendliest active retirement community, Nora. The reason Sumter is interesting is they all vote early. So that's why we have these numbers. We know how that county came through. And Donald Trump holding seniors as well as he did in 2016 is a big deal for him.
Yeah, John, everybody calls it so friendly, but my vivid memory of the Villages is a guy in the golf cart yelling white power as he's driving by with the flags waving, and then the president tweeting it.
Right.
Later, after he was chastised, he took it down. But the fact is, somebody said it, and then it was retweeted by the president of the United States.
Right.
So, I don't think of them necessarily as friendly. I know that,
that's their jingle.
I know that. I know. You're not saying it. I know that that's their jingle. I get it. But that's my recollection.
I think it's worth reminding people why. Florida is so important to the president's path to re-election.
Yes.
And while we are talking about the margins narrowing, therefore being slightly less favorable than 4 years ago, it is a pretty narrow one. He still is ahead with seniors and Latinos, though it has narrowed. So I think it's just something to continue to watch. It's why it's a toss-up. But as you were saying, it may be a leading indicator for the direction.
Set the table for the rest of the night.
Exactly.
Yes.
Florida ranking third in the country right now for new COVID cases. An outbreak there, a big concern. There, of course, are open in Florida, and it will be interesting to continue to follow that race there. That is a must-win for President Trump, those 29 electoral votes. Coming up, we're going to check in on the processing of those ballots in Pennsylvania. A lot of news coming out of there. We'll have an update for you. Be sure to download the CBS News app to track all your local races on your phone or your tablet. And keep watching us, because we've got a lot more news ahead. CBS News 2020 America Decides. We will be right back.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Polling has closed in multiple states as a record number of people cast ballots during this historic election year. In this 8 p.m. hour, polls closed in 16 more states and the District of Columbia. 172 electoral votes are on the line. Voters braved long lines and the cold today. More than 101 million people have already cast ballots during early voting periods across the country. Joe Biden spent the morning in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where he visited his childhood home. He'll watch results come in from Wilmington, Delaware. Meanwhile, the president will spend election night at the White House. For the latest, Lana Zach is at the board. Lana?
Now is when it starts getting really fun and interactive. And so I want to show our viewers what we're all looking at tonight. So this is the race to 270. Of course, that's the number of electoral votes that are needed to secure the presidency. As it stands right now, Biden has 20 and Trump is projected to have 26. And the reason why we say projected is because we at CBS News, we don't decide who the president is. We look at the data, we look at the numbers coming in, we analyze it, and we say this is what's likely going to happen. So as of right now, this is where things stand. Any place that you see this bright red with a check, Oklahoma, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee, those are states that we have projected right now that President Trump will win. The blue states with checks, Vermont, Massachusetts, Delaware, D.C., all of those are the states that we have projected that Biden is going to win. Now let's look at all of these white states here. These are those battleground states that we have been thinking about so much. There are some states like Florida where we are already starting to see those election results pouring in. We're going to be paying a lot of attention, of course, to Miami-Dade County, to this area around Orlando. This has been some of the hardest hit in the state in terms of the economy, particularly because the tourism industry is so important there. The reason why we might get some answers from Florida tonight, they started processing those ballots early. They've been counting all those absentee ballots. But another state, like Pennsylvania, which may be crucial for the president to win if he wants to hold on to the presidency, or Biden to win if he wants to claim this, we don't have any of that information really because they only started processing those absentee ballots today. So we're in for a very long night, Elaine, but this hopefully gives y'all some more understanding of what we're looking at. And this, of course, over here is the national vote totals. But when it comes to determining the president, it's at 270 electoral votes that matter the most. Elaine?
All right, Lana, Zach, thank you. We'll be checking in with you throughout the night. And for more on all this, I want to bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns, Linda Tran, and Terry Sullivan. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter. Linda is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. And Terry Sullivan is a CBS News political contributor, as well as the former campaign manager for Senator Marco Rubio's 2016 presidential campaign. Welcome to you all. It's great to have you. Caitlin, you are joining us from Pennsylvania, where the polls have just closed. We've seen both campaigns focus heavily on that state. Remind us what makes Pennsylvania so important.
Well, a couple of numbers to highlight how important Pennsylvania is. First, 20 electoral votes, a big prize of the night and critical to whoever wins the White House. A second number, 44,000. That's how many votes determined the presidency in this state for Donald Trump in 2016. It's a state that he's hoping to keep in his column and a state that Democrats really want to win back to block the president's path to victory. I'm outside of the Philadelphia Convention Center, and right behind me in this building is where all of the ballots from Philadelphia are going to be now that now that polls have closed here. Why is that significant? Well, Pennsylvania is key for the reasons I described, but also key for the way in which ballots are going to be counted here. Unlike in other states, Pennsylvania was not able to even open up ballots until 7 a.m. this morning when the polls opened. And so that's why officials have been telling us for weeks and weeks that we may not get results from Pennsylvania on election night because of that influx in mail-in absentee ballots. It's going to take a while to be able to count those ballots. The Secretary of State's office sent out about 3 million absentee ballots, and we've been talking to voters all around this state who were returning those ballots in person to secure drop boxes. So that's what we're keeping an eye on tonight. This is a state critical to the president's path to victory, and it's a state that has been visited by both Joe Biden and Donald Trump furiously over the past 2 days.
Well, Linda, what about Joe Biden? What are some of his paths to victory? Is there a way for him to win even without key states like Pennsylvania and Florida?
Well, there actually are, Elaine, and in fact, his floor starts quite a bit higher than might have been expected earlier this year. He's starting with about a floor of 226 electoral college votes. And while if we see Florida go his way, Ohio, North Carolina, some of the states that we expect to get earlier results from tonight, then that's probably sealing the deal for him taking the White House. But if he doesn't win those states, he can still cobble together a handful of others. He could, for example, have a combination with Arizona and Iowa. he could also pick up some of the other states that have been on the margins for the last several weeks. So the map generally is as wide as we have ever seen it in recent history for any presidential election, and that's probably good news for the Biden-Harris ticket.
All right, so Terry, what are some of the possibilities for President Trump's path to 270?
Linda hit the nail on the head. It is a narrow path, in all honesty. It is of all those states that we see right now on the map, that the white states that have on Anthony's map on CBS. The president has to win every single one of them right now. So it's a narrow path. He needs to win a Pennsylvania. He needs to win a Florida. He needs to win a Georgia. He needs to win a North Carolina. Joe Biden needs to win half of those, if that. He wins, frankly, any of those, and he's got a path to victory.
Can we, control room, I don't know if we can show the map that Terry's talking about, because I think for people's understanding, right, it can also go a long way, Terry, to see where the president concentrated his efforts in the last push here before Election Day. It was a frenetic pace on both campaigns' parts. And we saw the president, for instance, visit multiple states here. I don't know if we have that map to show, but the toss-ups are what you're talking about here, Terry, where it is really tight right now. Florida, of course, being the big question for President Trump's campaign.
I think Florida's a big one, but you're also looking at that looks Florida's going to be very tight. It always is. But surprisingly, Vice President Biden's got a real shot in North Carolina and Georgia. He wins either one of those, and the map becomes almost impossible for President Trump at that point. Those are two states that he must win, along with Florida. He really has to win all three of those swing states in order to have a clear path going forward. So, the Biden path is a little bit more broad on how to do this. And there, you've got the map there, you can see.
Yeah.
Any of those states that are in white right there, that Biden wins, and he only needs to win one of them, and he's on a path. President Trump, it's a different scenario. He's got to win 90% of those states.
Yeah. All right. Well, Caitlin, due to an increase in mail-in and absentee ballot votes submitted this election cycle, it could take days before we know a final result. Can we expect either one of the candidates to concede or declare victory tonight as polls close and results trickle in?
Well, both candidates want to wait and see what the results actually are. I think, however, that Terry is exactly right, that if we start to see some of these bellwethers tonight that we've been looking at, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, if Biden is leading there, wins those states, then that really does cut off the president's path to victory and makes the outcome of this election clear. Here in Pennsylvania, which is, as we've described, a key state, the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court here ruled that ballots can be accepted up until Friday as long as they were postmarked by Election Day. And that has been in response, of course, to delays in the Postal Service. So Pennsylvania could be counting those ballots through the rest of this week, which is, of course, why we are here. But tonight we should get some clear indications of how this will go because of other states that are going to be able to get results out tonight. So we're looking at Florida, of course, but also North Carolina, keep an eye on that, and Georgia. If the president does not win North Carolina and Georgia or Arizona, I think that tells you a lot of what you may need to know.
All right. And as we've been speaking, we want to let our viewers know that CBS News projects that President Trump wins Tennessee. Again, President Trump wins Tennessee. And the electoral vote count on that state is 11. So the president picks up 11 electoral votes. Linda, let me turn to you. More than 100 million Americans voted early, and that amounts to nearly 73% of all votes cast in 2016. Talk to us about the historic nature of this election cycle and what drove so many people to the polls this time around.
Well, Elaine, it really is historic, and there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, the first number I would point out is that of the 101 million ballots that were cast during the early vote period, well over 29% of them were voters who didn't vote in 2016. So there's certainly been a surge across the board, the people feeling like it was more important than ever for them to exercise their right to vote this cycle. Clearly, the coronavirus pandemic, the economy, these issues are top of mind for voters across the board. But we've also seen surges among certain demographic groups that probably bode well for the Biden-Harris ticket. Certainly Latino voters have been on the rise, African American and Asian voters, all of folks who were part of that Obama coalition that we often hear folks talk about. And also importantly, white college-educated voters have also been really tipping towards Biden in the states where we're able to track that kind of information. So surging all the way across the board, and mostly because I think people are just so anxious about the experience that we've had over the last several months, this year in particular, but also fear about what might come around the corner. All of the polling that we've seen recently, people on both sides of the aisle fear that the worst is yet to come, and they're worried about having the right kind of leadership in place to lead us out of these crises.
All right, in the final 30 seconds or so, Terry, legal challenges ahead. Both sides are preparing.
Yeah, both sides always prepare, and this is just the nature of campaigns at this level. You're going to have legal fights, and that's just how it works, because that's our society today. And so it's not a normal, shouldn't be concerned.
It's not. All right, if you say so, Terry Sullivan. I'm going to write that down. Terry Sullivan, don't be concerned. All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Linda Tradd, and Terry Sullivan, thank you all for joining me. I really appreciate it. We are going to take a quick break, but we'll have much more coverage on the state of the race straight ahead. Stay with us. You're streaming CBSN.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Do you think that the president has the authority to send in active duty troops?
Face the questions you want answered.
Did the CDC let the American people down? Tell me about the decision. When was it made? Who made it? What is the next area that you are concerned about? What does that mean for the risk of reinfection here in the United States?
You bring up a very good point, Margaret.
Margaret, that's a great question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
Welcome back to CBS News Election Headquarters. Polls are closed in half of the states across America. Joining them in just a few moments, Arkansas. And we want to check back in on Georgia, North Carolina, and Ohio. They are part of our notable 9 states that will help decide this election. All 3 voted for President Donald Trump in 2016. And right now, CBS News characterizes them all as toss-ups at this hour. So much to talk about with these key battleground states coming in. And also, we're seeing some new exit polls, national exit polls that we can tell you about. The suburban vote. Was President Trump able to hold on to them? Independents, just to tease here, can't tell you, but there's been a big swing. I have to wait 10 more seconds before I can tell you what it is. And also the senior vote. So many interesting developments tonight that tell us just how this race is going tonight. We'll pause for just a second as it's now 8:30 in the East, and CBS News can project that President Trump is likely to win Arkansas in the race to 270 electoral votes. President Trump has 37. Joe Biden has 20. I was telling you about all those interesting things we want to tell you about. Well, Elections Director Anthony Salvanto is at the Election Data Center. And Anthony, let's dig into Georgia because some really interesting developments there.
Right. Not a lot of vote counted in Georgia yet. You see the map here, the counties in red going towards the president, the counties in blue going towards Joe Biden. But what I'm going to show you folks is the overlay of what our CBS News models have for this state at the moment when we combine the exit poll interviews that we've been doing for the last few weeks with the early vote as well as today. So I turn that on, and the estimate leans towards Joe Biden. And that's how we look at things here at the decision desk. That's what makes this race a toss-up. When the trends keep going the way they are, it might go towards Biden, but the counted vote right now for Donald Trump. Now, the other thing I want to show you is I'm going to zoom in here on Metro Atlanta, which is one part that we're going to focus on all night. Cobb County, right now, 63% for Biden. I'm going to show you the history of that. Hillary Clinton only got 48%. Look at that. Joe Biden besting those numbers. I'm going to show you Fulton County, where the Democrats will need to win by a big margin. Not much of it in yet, but 78% for Joe Biden. 10 points better than Hillary Clinton did. So he is on a trend line to outperform Hillary Clinton. Will it be enough to hold up and beat Donald Trump? That we are a long way from seeing, because I will show you, Nora, only 22% of the vote.
Okay, Anthony, stand by just a second. I know John wants to make a point about Georgia.
Well, Cobb, Anthony, first of all, to your point, this was a county that George W. Bush won by more than 20 points. And it's the perfect illustration of that changing landscape of a state of Georgia. It used to be a ruby red county. Now it's blue. But there's 31% of the vote in Cobb. Is that because we're at a difference here between early vote and day of vote?
Yes. It is, because what the story all night as these votes come in is going to be trying to parse which is which. At this moment, we are not sure. And so what's going to happen is the Republicans, we believe, have done well. Donald Trump has done better on that election day vote. But it's that early vote, John, where Joe Biden, we think, has run up the score.
That's a very important point that's being made, because it could still change without the night as more of the votes come in. Let me ask you, Anthony, about the state of Ohio. That has closed. A very important, no Republican has won the presidency without the state of Ohio.
Indeed. So let's zoom in there. Now, here we do have votes starting to come in, 42% of it, in fact. Key things to watch in Ohio. First of all, Cleveland metro area, up in here, okay? At the moment, let's zoom in for a second on Cuyahoga. Here's another place where Democrats have to do well. Right now, Joe Biden at 74.8. I'm going to show you the past history, 66% for Clinton. So if you're Joe Biden, you're liking that percentage. That's where you start. But then we're going to look at the counties around Cleveland, whether it be Summit County. How's he doing there? Better than Hillary Clinton. Portage. Well, nothing in there yet, so we'll keep watching as well. So one of the things I want to watch tonight, Metro Cleveland, can Joe Biden outperform Hillary Clinton? That'll tell you whether or not he's got a shot in Ohio.
What is so fascinating is all you have to do is follow the candidate's schedule, because Joe Biden made a surprise visit to that very place just yesterday after spending so little time in the state of Ohio. His folks must have known what was going on and said, let's send him there.
What he knew was that Sherrod Brown, the senator, who had thought about running for president himself, who has been very concerned about winning back his state, called Biden and said, come to Cleveland. And it may end up working today. They even sent Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, today to Columbus, thinking that they could potentially drive up the vote there.
It's also interesting, too, to note that Mike Bloomberg added last-minute money to Ohio. You know, he gave the $100 million. After he dropped out of the race, he said, I will do whatever I can to support whoever the Democratic nominee is. It was Joe Biden. He's given $100 million in Florida. That money's been well spent. At the very last minute, he added money to Ohio, too. But that have made a difference in advertising.
What I think is also interesting here in Ohio is you look at that breakdown, and Trump is still doing very well among white voters without a college degree. This is interesting because one of the unique attributes Joe Biden sold for himself was that he could relate to working class America and bring them back to the Democratic Party. For those who voted for Barack Obama, tried out Trump, that he could bring them back to Democrats. So we'll have to see where the night takes us. But to see in Ohio, President Trump is still doing very well among white voters without that degree, that education gap.
Which is actually a very large share of the electorate. People would be surprised to know it was in 2016.
That's right.
We'll be looking at, we're going to go inside the numbers in Ohio about why people voted the way they did. That's why we turned to Major Garrett. He's got the info.
That's right, Nora. And for Ohio and all exit polls, what I like to say is, yes, it's numbers, it's percentages, but it's really the story of the election. It's a story that you tell state by state. So I'm going to start slow. You might think it's a little on the boring side, but I guarantee you, stick with me. I'll have a grabber for you at the end. All right, let's look at the composition of the Ohio vote. 2016 Clinton voters, how did they break? Okay, 94 Biden, 5 for Trump. How did the Trump voters from 2016 go this time? 94-6. You're all saying boring. Come on, Major, where's the grabber? I'm showing it to you now. These are voters who showed up this time who did not vote in 2016. They're breaking 64-34 for Joe Biden, and they are making up 13% of the electorate in Ohio. I've got another little nugget for you. White college women, Donald Trump in Ohio won them by 17 points. In 2020, according to the exit poll data, Joe Biden is winning them by 20. That is a 37-point switch.
Whoa.
Whoa.
Yeah. I told you there would
Say that again.
I told you.
Say that, explain that, because that just seems like a huge data point at this hour. Say it again.
So, white college women in Ohio, making up 16% of the 2020 electorate, are breaking for Joe Biden 60-40. This demographic went for Donald Trump in 2016 by 17 points, 56-39. So that is a shift in Ohio that could be very important as this night unfolds.
Okay, do we know why? This is one thing we always said, okay, we're going to see certain different people vote different ways. Why is there that shift away from Trump?
Probably because there is an emphasis in the minds of these voters on coronavirus as opposed to rebuilding the economy. There is this dichotomy, choose one or the other. Of course, some voters say, I can choose both, but I want to prioritize one over another. We'll dig more deeply into that.
Did it have anything to do with President Trump's rhetoric? The bullying of people, the comments about Fauci, that was part of his closing argument. The president chose to make that part.
So I can't give you specific numbers on Ohio for this demographic group, but I can tell you in conversations with Republicans and Democrats about focus groups during the latter parts of this campaign, one thing emerged they'd never seen before. Voters saying, I agree with the president's policies, I have benefited from them, but there are parts of his personality I just can't take. And elevating character and persona over policy, which is something that pollsters have told me in focus groups they've never seen in the way they saw in this election cycle.
Yeah, and remember, Biden was talking about these issues before the pandemic began, before that really caused people to really think about his leadership skills.
We've got some news coming up in just a second about the independent vote as well nationally, which is really striking. But we've also got some breaking news right now, so we want to check in with CBS's Mark Strassman. He is in Georgia, where they're having a big problem counting some of the votes. Mark?
Nora, this is an election return watch party here on the edge of Atlanta. These are mostly excited Democrats because when's the last time Georgia thought of itself as a battleground state? After a record early returns and essentially a day of problem-free voting, there is now a hitch in the tabulation of votes. I'm standing in Fulton County. Fulton County includes a chunk of Atlanta. Downtown Atlanta is State Farm Arena, where the Atlanta Hawks play. They are tabulating the absentee ballots of Fulton County, Georgia's most populous county. A water pipe has broken inside the arena. They had counted 86,000 absentee ballots. We don't know how many more they have yet to tabulate, but all the tabulation of those ballots has now stopped. We're told by election officials they may not finish tabulating those votes for a day or two. So depending how close the rest of the state is, we may not know the result of this critical battleground state for another day or two. That is because, again, a water pipe has broken in State Farm Arena. State Farm Arena is where they were counting the absentee ballots of Georgia's most populous county, and now that tabulation has stopped. Whoa. Big development here.
But, Mark, do you know how many ballots we're talking about? What that means?
We don't know. We've asked that question, Gail, and we haven't got an answer for that yet. We know that there were 86,000, but apparently it's a very labor-intensive process, and what they are telling us is that it's going to take a day or two, which suggests to me that they have a lot to go.
Yeah. The irony is that across the country, so many of these major league sports teams open up their arenas to allow people to vote and to do exactly what Mark has said. Tabulate them in a big open space so they could be done quickly, but nobody accounted for the plumbing, I guess.
I was going to say, I'm no plumber, but maybe because it hasn't been used lately. It's not up and ready for the big turnout today.
And just to put this in perspective, Fulton County is a very, very Democratic county. Hillary Clinton won it by 40 points. So if there is a delay, it's going to be Joe Biden's votes that are sitting up in the air while they dry things out.
But John Dickerson, I love your knowledge of history. Have you ever heard of votes being delayed because a pipe burst?
No,
you wrote the book.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure there's an intersection between plumbing and history.
I know, but it's so funny because here we were thinking about foreign interference.
Exactly.
This was going to take down a vote, and now it's just
voter intimidation.
That wasn't on the model of
it wasn't
interference,
and it's just
for the evening. And it'll complicate in some ways the way we can extrapolate from the data for the rest of the South.
Right.
So that could have some impact on our figuring things out at the table.
Right, but we're going to keep everything in perspective. It is in one county. It's a big state, the state of Georgia. It is an important county, nevertheless.
Yeah,
but
biggest county in the state. But
I know, an important one. We're going to keep everything in perspective. All right, CBS News want to bring you a projection at this point because West Virginia goes to President Trump, a reliably Republican state. And coming up, how are the candidates feeling as the votes come in? We're going to check in with our correspondents along with more poll closings, projections, and the state of this race overall. We'll do the what happens if board, as we call it, to see the pathways to the presidency. You're watching CBS News 2020, America Decides.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Do you think that the president has the authority to send in active duty troops?
Face the questions you want answered.
Did the CDC let the American people down? Tell me about the decision. When was it made? Who made it? What is the next area that you are concerned about? What does that mean for the risk of reinfection here in the United States?
You bring up a very good point, Margaret.
Margaret, that's a great question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Go to the ends of the earth
Right now.
We got something crazy.
Boom.
and reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative,
Da-da-da-da.
and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Welcome back to our election night coverage. The polls have already closed in multiple states, but voting continues across the western U.S. as Americans add their ballots to more than 100 million early votes. So far, CBS News projects Joe Biden wins Washington, D.C., Delaware, and Massachusetts. President Trump is projected to win Indiana, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia. Lana Zach is at the board. Lana, what's the latest?
Hey there, Elaine. We're still learning a little bit at this point. There's a lot more for us to figure out. At this point, here's where we stand in the race to 270. President Trump, having now just called an additional state, West Virginia, stands with 42 electoral votes, likely projected for him compared to 20 for Biden. Now, you may notice, though, that when it comes to the popular vote, they're still much closer in that. There's also something that I wanted to show you guys, if I can figure out the board, which I'm still honestly learning a bit about, which is the history of how this electoral map played out in 2016. Obviously, Pennsylvania and Florida, we have talked a lot about these two states. As you can see right now, they are still too close to call, but there's something very interesting that we're starting to see in some of these exit polls. The president's favorabilities in Pennsylvania, he's underwater there, 46% favorable, 53% unfavorable. And in Florida, we see the same sort of thing playing out, 44% favorable compared to 54% unfavorable. It doesn't mean necessarily that we have a clear picture of how these are all going to play out. As you'll recall, early on in the night, I said that we saw American voters saying that they were turning out in favor of their candidate as opposed to voting against somebody. But it does help to explain, I think, a bit, Elaine, about why we are seeing in Pennsylvania and Florida, two states that he won in the last election, that the president may be struggling a little bit more in.
All right, Lana Zach, thank you. You are doing such a great job on that board, by the way. Better you than me, because Yes, I would be all thumbs on that thing. Lana,
I'm still learning.
No, it's so helpful to have you. Thank you so much. We're going to be checking in with you in just a bit. CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns, meanwhile, is at the battleground state of Pennsylvania at her post there in Philadelphia. And Caitlin, for people who maybe haven't been watching since the earlier part of the day, explain why you are where you are and what might be happening just behind you there, beyond the camera's view.
Yes, good evening from the cradle of democracy here in Philadelphia. I'm in front of the Philadelphia Convention Center, and why I'm here is because all of the ballots for Philadelphia are actually right in this building behind me. This is where the action is tonight. This is where they're going to be counting all of those ballots, especially all those absentee ballots, a record number expected in this state tonight. Why we've been focused on Pennsylvania, not only because of its 20 electoral votes, not only because this was a state determined by just 44,000 votes in 2016, but because here in Pennsylvania, they haven't been able, by state law, they're not allowed to have started to open up those absentee ballots until 7 a.m. this morning. So that means that we're likely to see a delay in reporting results here in Pennsylvania because it's going to just take a while to open up those ballots as they have been doing here today. So this is a critical state. It's a state that both President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden have been spending a lot of time here. This is a critical battleground. And if it comes down to Pennsylvania, we may not know the results here on election night. But we're keeping an eye on this building behind us because that's where the focus is tonight, given these ballots.
So you have been talking to voters on the ground in various battleground states. What were some of the top concerns that people were thinking about, ahead of this moment, ahead of election night? Was there anything that they said or didn't say that surprised you?
A couple of different things that really stood out to us talking to voters on the ground here as they were dropping off ballots at early polling locations or at secure drop boxes was that how they are processing the biggest story of this election, which is the pandemic, was really interesting depending on who they were supporting. So supporters of the president told us that Trump did everything that he could on the virus, that they were focused on the economy and reopening and thought that was a top priority. And that's in line with the messaging that we've heard from the president while he's been campaigning. Talking to supporters of Biden, they were very much focused on the pandemic, the way in which it has uprooted their lives. And they see, as they told us, this campaign a referendum on the president's handling of the pandemic. What was really interesting is that according to all of these voters that we talked to, all of them were really focused on how to cast their ballots this time around. Remember, the pandemic has added all sorts of challenges to the way we vote in this country, especially here in Pennsylvania. They haven't had this kind of number of absentee ballots before, 3 million sent out. And voters were telling us that they've been very strategic about how to learn about how to vote, how to make sure their ballot counts, how to check off everything that they need to make sure it counts. Interestingly, though, a couple of other themes. We didn't really hear much from voters about the Supreme Court. Remember, heading into this election just a few weeks ago, we were wondering how big of an issue this would be. Voters on both sides really didn't bring it up unless they were prompted. Instead, it was the economy and coronavirus really shaping voters' views here in Pennsylvania.
That is interesting to hear about the Supreme Court because, of course, we know that President Trump had really kind of pushed forth his nomination and the Senate's confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett as a conservative justice, yet another appointee of President Trump's assuming a place there on the high court. Well, Caitlin, we know that Florida, of course, is another key state that we are watching tonight. Remind our viewers, why is Florida so critical?
That's right. This is always a big battleground, and it's always determined by the slimmest of margins. We were on the ground reporting in South Florida recently following how they are going to conduct this election. And it's actually pretty interesting because I think when everybody thinks of Florida, they think of the 2000 election that went all the way to the Supreme Court. Well, that is a state that has learned from past mistakes. So as we're talking this election season about all of these other states that are trying to ramp up and expand their absentee ballot programs, figure out how to conduct elections in a pandemic. Florida is trying not to be the problem child of this election. We spent some time in Broward County, a key county, and they are able in Florida to start counting and tabulating, processing ballots before Election Day. And so they say that they will have results at some point tonight, even if it's in the wee hours. But this is a state that the president won in 2016. It is a state that in the 2018 midterms, Republicans won the governorship and a Senate race there, but by very slim margins. So this really comes down to every single vote counting in that state. And remember, if it is within a half percentage point, there is an automatic recount.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns in the battleground state of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much, Caitlin. See you in a little bit, I'm sure, as they continue their count. All right, this election carries a lot of weight for Americans, and for some, reproductive rights are among their top issues. With new conservative judge Amy Coney Barrett seated at the Supreme Court, some were concerned that Roe v. Wade could be in jeopardy. CBS News reporter Kate Smith joins me now. She's reported extensively on the issue of abortion rights. Kate, thanks very much for being with us. The candidates have vastly different positions when it comes to this issue. Remind us where they each stand.
Elaine, these candidates could not have more divergent views when it comes to reproductive health issues. We're talking abortion, birth control access, maternal health. It's impossible to overstate how different these candidates are. Let's do a little recap. Former Vice President Joe Biden, his big thing is he wants to repeal Hyde. That is the amendment passed by Congress in the 70s that prohibits any federal funding from going towards abortion. That means that Medicaid can't cover the procedure, nor any insurance programs provided by the government. He also would like to codify Roe v. Wade into law. Now, that's especially important as we're seeing at the court. Roe may not be as secure as it once was. But to be honest, much of his platform has to do with repealing many of the actions that the Trump administration has taken to reduce access to abortion. Some of those things have included repealing funding towards Planned Parenthood, getting rid of, or I should say expanding the different ways that employers cannot cover birth control on their plans. That's the birth control mandate from the ACA. And of course, Trump's biggest promise to voters when it comes to abortion are those Supreme Court judge picks. He's picked 3 so far in his term, and to give the court a solid 6-3 conservative majority. Now, what that means for people who, reproductive rights are their important election issue is that, Roe v. Wade is much less secure than it was when Trump was running in 2016. In 2016, it was more of a hypothetical that Roe v. Wade could be overturned. But as we are looking now in the courts, the cases that are coming through the court system, it is much more reality than it is hypothetical.
Well, the president and his supporters have tried to characterize him as the most anti-abortion president in U.S. history. What is the president's strategy? Why does it matter in this election?
That's exactly right. And, that is a title that Trump has embraced. He has multiple times called himself the most pro-life president in American history. And his track record shows that is true. Why that's so important to elections is that for the evangelical vote, being opposed to abortion is a great way to secure that vote. And we saw it in 2016 with his VP pick of Pence. Pence, of course, is a very strong anti-abortion rights activist, and it really solidified to voters that Trump was indeed going to make good on his promises to try to reduce abortion access, to try to overturn Roe, and it helped him in the 2016 election. Of course, he's made good on many of those promises. So going into 20, for voters who this is their issue, they feel very secure that indeed Trump is their candidate.
Well, how much of a factor are reproductive rights for voters? Is this a make or break issue?
So that's a really interesting point, and it's one that really breaks down on party lines. For Democrats, it's less of an issue than it is for Republicans. So a recent Pew study found that about 35% of Biden voters found abortion rights to be a very important issue. Now compare that to Trump voters. The number goes up to 46%. And when I was speaking to strategists, the way they describe it is that abortion is always forefront if abortion is your issue. The regulations, the bans, all the different court fights. But if you're a Democrat, often the things that energize that base are simply the bans. It is not the year-to-year, month-to-month battle. So you don't have that engagement that you do with the Republican side. And that is certainly something that we've seen the campaign take advantage of and do be quite successful on.
Well, regardless of the election outcome, could Roe v. Wade be overturned?
Again, that is such an important question. And the short answer is yes. Again, back in 2016, when Trump made these original campaign promises, overturning Roe was much more hypothetical than it was reality. But as we're seeing, it is, again, it's reality now, potentially. And, it's imminent. This Friday, the Supreme Court will consider reviewing a case that would directly overturn Roe. And Elaine, if they don't take that one, there's more than a dozen cases in the pipeline. So again, this is one of those promises that he made back in 2016 that felt so impractical at the time, felt so pie in the sky. But as we're seeing just 4 years later, it's very real, could happen.
Well, finally, 2 states put abortion on the ballot this election. What can you tell us about that?
That's right. So in a very literal sense, abortion is on the ballot in 2 different states, Louisiana and Colorado. In Louisiana, they're anticipating that post-Roe world. They asked voters to consider a constitutional amendment that would make it such that that no one would be able to find a right to abortion in the Louisiana Constitution. Now, when I was talking to one strategist, they said it's very unlikely that anyone would find a right to abortion in the Louisiana Constitution. But the idea is that in the event that Roe v. Wade is overturned, there would be no time in which that abortion rights groups could come in and try to make it such that the state would ban it. In Colorado, a much more simple, straightforward measure, a ballot measure that would ban abortion after 22 weeks of pregnancy. Important to note, Colorado is one of only 7 states that doesn't have a gestational limit. Why that's important is Colorado has become something of an abortion haven in the American West for patients who are seeking the procedure later in their pregnancy. And, we've spoken about this several times, but there are very, very limited legal circumstances in which a patient could do that. And those are, for severe fetal abnormalities, for women's health. So if, in fact, that ballot measure is successful, it would dramatically transform the way in which patients are able to access abortion, not just in Colorado, but really beyond the state borders.
All right, Kate Smith. Kate, thank you very much. Up next, it's a CBS News special report, America Decides. You're streaming CBSN. Welcome back to Times Square in New York and our CBS News election headquarters. I'm Norah O'Donnell, along with our powerhouse political team. It's almost 9 o'clock in the East, 6 o'clock in the West, and polls are closing in several battleground states, including Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona. Polls are also closing in Minnesota, a state that the Trump campaign is hoping to turn red, but that found itself at the center of the debate about racial injustice when George Floyd was killed there this summer. Texas is also closing. It's a state the Democrats are dreaming of turning blue again, even as the Republican leaders of that state repeatedly challenged attempts to expand voting there ahead of the pandemic. Counting is underway in more than 40 states, and results pouring in here at our election center, and we're just starting to get that picture.
just how tight the race is. All the battleground states closing at this hour have faced stunning increases in coronavirus infections and are all struggling with job losses. So also we'll see how those issues are affecting the vote tonight. At this hour, CBS News is able to project that Minnesota is leaning toward Joe Biden. That is significant.
That was a state that the Trump campaign had hoped to flip.
And Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Texas, all toss-ups at this hour.
When was that?
As for the other 9 states where polls have just closed, CBS News is able to project that Joe Biden has won New York State. And CBS News is prepared to categorize New Mexico as likely for Biden. And President Trump is likely to win Kansas, Louisiana, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. New York, a winner there for Joe Biden. There is a look at the whole map. Let's check in with our elections director, Anthony Salvanto. Anthony.
Hey there, let me show you a couple of states we're watching here, the toss-ups that everybody is trying to figure out here at the decision desk. First, North Carolina, still a toss-up. Joe Biden up in the counted vote. And if I turn on what we're running for our decision models, that is where the trend lines are headed, that stays at a Joe Biden lead. Now, one of the things that would keep you from projecting this is if I show you the remaining vote, President Trump only needs, in our computations, 55% of what's outstanding to catch up and tie Joe Biden. So that's not enough. That's not a wide enough lead yet for Joe Biden. And 74% of the vote is in, so you've got about a quarter still left. So a lot more to come there in North Carolina. The other thing I want to show you is Texas. Now they're starting to count. They've been counting for a while. Right now, it is very, very close, 49-9 to 48-8 for Joe Biden. Democrats really ran up a lead in the early vote, but we see Republicans catching up in the Election Day vote. It's the same story that's been going on. I'll do the same thing. I'm going to show you our decision desk models. The president actually takes an edge when we add in what we expect to get from all of the rural counties around Texas, which are reliably, heavily Republican. That bodes well for the president.
But Anthony, put it right back to what is the current vote tally at this hour, not the sort of projection. It's incredible, Ed, to see how close the Lone Star is. I grew up in Texas.
And the Texas you grew up in is not the Texas of today, and that is why it is a toss-up now. And when was the last time Texas was a toss-up? 1976, I believe, was the last time a Democrat won it, and Jimmy Carter did it. And here we are tonight having a serious, potentially, conversation about a Democrat winning the state, or at least keeping it close. Remember, Democrats will say, even if they don't win the state of Texas tonight, they're going to win congressional seats, and they're going to win a lot of local races, and they're going to turn that state purple, meaning that come 2024 at least, we may be talking
But the fact that it's so close says something, doesn't it, John? I mean, who would think that Texas would even be in this conversation?
Well, and the turnout has been astronomical in Texas. More people voted early than voted the entire time in 2016. And looking at some of these counties, Collin County, there's 130,000 more voters in just that one county than there were last time. So there's something going on in Texas for sure. And also we should mention the State House in Texas, that hangs in the balance as well.
I mean, this is a state that Trump won by almost 10 points in 2016. The fact that we see it so close tonight, but Joe Biden never visited the state. This is largely, Beto O'Rourke and what he tried to do in 2018. This is the changing demographics of the state, right?
The executive director of the state party tells me that when you add up all the money spent by local and statewide candidates in that state, Democrats have collectively spent about $100 million to turn out the vote in the state of Texas tonight. Wow. The Biden campaign only threw in $6.5 million worth of television advertising, which is nothing in a state that big. But that is how they believe they could potentially at least make it competitive and remind the country that the state's one that's going to have to be looked at more seriously.
I don't think, Nora, you guys should underestimate the power of Beyonce, Queen Bee. we have to at least.
But that's a lesson for every day of the week, right?
Now, she's from Houston.
And she just endorsed him the other day, very, very subtly.
Endorsed Joe Biden?
Yes, Joe Biden, yeah. It wasn't Donald Trump. She definitely endorsed Joe Biden, but I know what you were saying. Biden and Harris, and she did a very subtle hat tip. I mean, everybody goes, yeah, sure. But I wonder when you have somebody like that who very rarely gets involved in politics, if that makes a difference.
Well, there's a big mix of things going on there. You have celebrity endorsements like that.
Yes.
You have the dynamics that won Democrats congressional seats across the country in the suburbs of big cities across the country. It happened in Texas 2 years ago. They're building on that. You have Latino support for Biden because of their opposition to the president. And you have an influx of millions over the last several years from across the country who moved to the state for its medical industry, the technology industry, transforming it. And that's, again, we're seeing this happen in Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Texas tonight. The country is changing, and it's presidential politics.
It also has the highest total number of COVID cases in the United States right now, particularly along that border area, El Paso. You were talking about Beto O'Rourke, his home territory there. It is just really getting devastated by infections right now. I mean, if and it's a big if Biden were to flip Texas and he took the 2016 states that Clinton won back then, I mean, that's it. That's a game.
Right. I had spoken with some Biden advisors early in the night who didn't want to characterize this state. They still believe this is a dream. They really don't think that at the end of the night that they would be able to flip Texas. It's just such a Republican state. But the turnout is quite remarkable, given that, in fact, the Republican governor, Abbott, made it difficult, very difficult for people to vote in that state. Let's bring in CBS's Omar Villafranca. He joins us now from Richardson, Texas. That is a suburb of Dallas. And Omar, I know you were out with the voters today. Long lines as well today.
They were, but they were moving along. And keep in mind, you had more than 9 million people vote early. Just under 17 million registered voters here in Texas. 9 million of them voted early. 5.6 million Latino voters. An interesting note, since 2016, 1.8 million new voters in the state of Texas. Now, I heard you guys talking about Harris County. Harris, Dallas, Travis, Bexar. Those traditionally go blue. But keep in mind, 254 counties here in Texas. El Paso over there is in the mountain time zone, so they're just closing the polls right now. But people are watching the suburbs. I hear you guys talking about suburban women. Suburbs, what are they doing out there? Well, I'm here in Collin County. Now, keep in mind, Mitt Romney won Collin County by 32 points. When the president ran in 2016, he won by 16 points. But in the midterm election, heated race between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke, Cruz only won by 6 points. That raised a few eyebrows. So now people are watching to see what's going to happen and if Texas will become a battleground state. Maybe in 2024, if that's the case. Ed, get ready for a barbecue.
It is every political reporter's dream come true to have to cover politics in Lone Star.
And, of course, we know that Texas is really the mother lode of electoral votes, 38 electoral votes.
And just to update you on Collin County, which is in my head, President Trump won it. Candidate Trump won it by 17 points. He's only winning it by 2 points right now with 95% of the vote in Collin County.
Those are those shrinking margins as Biden has been able to cut into the lead with those independents, with those college-educated white women. That is the shrinking of the margin that Trump had in the previous election.
And Nora, just to pick up on a point you made about how tough it has been made to vote in Texas, it's one of the few states where you need an excuse to vote absentee. Being afraid of getting COVID was not enough.
Yes, that's right. And he limited the number of ballot boxes per county to one ballot box per county. Harris County covers all of the Houston area. So for 5 million people, there was one drop-off ballot box. Janet Shamlian did an incredible story on the CBS Evening News about that people were driving 30 and 40 miles. That Harris County is bigger than the state of Rhode Island. So people were driving that far just to drop off their ballot. It's a reminder, though, this election, we talked about how much matters. We've seen people say, my vote is one of the most important things I can do. I can control that, and I want my voice to be heard.
And that's one of the messages of tonight. Whatever happens, the people have turned out and have worked very hard to vote in a way they haven't maybe in any of our lifetimes.
One of the things we should point out at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 in the West, the fact that so many states remain white right now, that is not, normal year, non-pandemic year, you'd see a few more of those states
Meaning
up on the board. They're toss-ups, that's right. They haven't been called. That's partly because we're looking at a more competitive horse race between the president and the former vice president, but also because the pandemic is making it harder to count ballots in a lot of these states, or at least it's slowing the process a bit. But the fact that several of those states along the East Coast and now in the Midwest, the fact that they can't be called yet is a reminder of that.
Yeah, we talk about the changing America. We want to bring in CBS News contributor Maria Elena Salinas because, Maria Elena, Texas, it's got a huge Latino population.
That's right, Nora. Almost 1 in 3 voters in Texas is Latino, 5.6 million in all. But turnout in this group has usually been very low. Only 40% of Latinos voted in Texas in 2016. But that's not the case this year. There's 2 million Latinos that voted early in Texas, driven mostly by young and first-time voters. That's a 25% increase from 2016. And that's just the early voting. 60% of them are supporting Biden. So, what's bringing them out? Well, President Trump is a lightning rod for many in Texas. They're particularly turned off by the president's anti-immigrant rhetoric and his policies like family separations and limits on legal immigration. There's also that mass shooting targeted Mexicans at the Walmart in El Paso where 23 people were killed. And then there's the coronavirus, like Margaret mentioned, which is decimating border cities like El Paso and Rio Grande Valley. El Paso is in a state of emergency right now with morgues running out of space. So as far as Texas, Latinos who support the president, the biggest issues for them are law and order and the economy. So if Texas does turn blue, if it does, let's see if the Latino vote has something to do with that.
All right, Maria Elena Salinas, thank you. And CBS News projects at this hour that President Trump has won the state of Arkansas. Also, CBS News projects Joe Biden has won the state of New Jersey. Coming up, Major Garrett has new details on those independent voters and a big change from 2016. You're watching CBS News 2020, America Decides.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Do you think that the president has the authority to send in active duty troops?
Face the questions you want answered.
Did the CDC let the American people down? Tell me about the decision. When was it made? Who made it? What is the next area that you are concerned about? What does that mean for the risk of reinfection here in the United States?
You bring up a very good point, Margaret.
Margaret, that's a great question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Go to the ends of the earth
Right now.
We got something crazy.
Boom.
and reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative,
Da-da-da-da.
and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Thank you for joining us on Election Day 2020. It is about 9:15 here on the East Coast, and polls have now closed in more than half the country. Polls closed this hour in 14 states, including the battleground states of Arizona, Texas, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. We have learned, per a senior Trump campaign official, that President Trump will speak tonight from the East Room. Quote, even if it's not to declare victory, he needs to set the narrative, end quote. The 9 o'clock hour is a critical one for both President Trump and Joe Biden. 156 electoral votes are up for grabs this year and could start to give one of the candidates a glimpse at victory. CBS News projects President Trump will win Arkansas, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and West Virginia. Joe Biden is projected to win New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Delaware, Connecticut, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. But regardless of the winner, the 2020 election is already one for the history books. More than 101 million people voted early this election. That's more than 73% of the total turnout for 2016. But we may still not know a winner tonight. That's because some states like Wisconsin did not start counting their mail-in ballots until today. Let's bring in our election night panel, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Leslie Sanchez, and Joel Payne. Caitlin is CBSN's political reporter and joins us from Philadelphia. Leslie is a CBS News political analyst, and Joel is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Leslie and Joel are both joining us from Washington. It is good to see you all. Remember when we all used to crowd around this table? That feels like 25 million years ago. But it's so good to see you guys. All right, Caitlin, let me start with you because you are in Pennsylvania. All eyes are on that state. It is a critical state for both candidates. Their polls closed at 8, but election officials there say it could take several days to get through all of those early ballots. So when might we know who won? And could that essentially vote counting process, I don't want to use the word delay because that gives the impression perhaps to some that there might be something wrong, but could the time that it takes to actually count all of those votes in Pennsylvania leave the entire election potentially in limbo?
Elaine, I miss being at that table with you as well. But Pennsylvania, I guess, is the next best thing because this is a key battleground state, not only because it's 20 electoral votes, not only because it was determined by such a slim margin in 2016, but because of exactly what you just described, whether we will actually get results on election night. Officials on the ground here have been telling us for weeks not to expect results from Pennsylvania. Why? Well, they couldn't start opening up ballots to be counted until today, until Election Day. That's different from states like Florida and elsewhere, which have been able to start processing, opening up ballots and processing them before Election Day. So they have been sending those warning signs ahead of time, saying that they're prioritizing accuracy over speed. So it's not a bad thing. The integrity of the election is still very strong. It just might take a few days, perhaps, to get results. The state Supreme Court also ruled here that any ballot received within 3 days after Election Day, so by Friday, as long as it was postmarked by Election Day, will still be counted. I am standing in front of the Philadelphia Convention Center. Why am I here? Well, this is where all of the ballots for Philadelphia are, right behind me in this building. So it's a very busy scene in there with lots of workers counting and tabulating those ballots. And this is why there is such a focus on Pennsylvania. If it all comes down to Pennsylvania, this could be really key. And we know that both campaigns have been focused on this state, barnstorming it over the past couple of days, having lots and lots of events here. They know that this is such a critical state for their respective paths to victory.
And Caitlin, more broadly beyond just Pennsylvania, how big of a deciding factor could these early ballots be in general?
They're such a big factor. Remember, in this pandemic, we're voting in ways that we may not have before. So a lot of states have ramped up their absentee ballot programs. Several other states have extended the number of days to be able to vote early. We've seen that Democrats have had an advantage in the early vote totals. And today, on Election Day, is where the Trump campaign hopes to make up those margins. They're hoping that in these key states, especially where I am here in Pennsylvania, that turnout will help them on Election Day. So that's kind of why we've all been watching these ballots. It's a way that a lot of states haven't done that before. Here in Pennsylvania, I should note that even before the pandemic, the bipartisan state legislature passed a measure allowing people to vote absentee without an excuse. Over 3 million absentee ballots have gone out here.
All right. Well, Leslie, our CBS News Battleground Tracker did have President Trump trailing Joe Biden coming into Election Day, but his campaign was expecting a big turnout today. So when you look at the map, what states are you looking at to give the president his best chance at victory?
Let's start from the beginning, Elaine, and or at the bottom part of the southern area and Florida. And by Florida, I'm talking about the very bottom, Miami-Dade County. That's an area particularly that had to turn out for the president. We've spent a lot of time understanding that I-4 corridor, Broward County, that's moving up toward the central part of the state. But Miami-Dade has turned out to be extraordinarily interesting, not only because of the Cuban-American vote, but because the Cuban-American vote is tremendously overpowering in terms of support than it did in 2016. And that may be a single outlier in terms of how that the Latino effect could ripple across the country. It's going to be different in Texas and Arizona, but it's certainly going to have an impact. And we're just starting to see and understand that now.
Yeah, I mean, it is really just neck and neck when you look at those numbers out of Florida. All right, so Joel, what does it look like now for Joe Biden? I mean, what do the paths actually look like? We saw on that map a moment ago, those areas in white, those are toss-ups at this moment. We see, for instance, Texas, a place where Democrats have been saying for a long time they could flip it blue. It has been a reliably red state. But what are your thoughts now as you look at that map? Still a lot there in Texas, that race, just absolutely neck and neck, something that perhaps even just as recently as a few years ago would not have necessarily been something people would have predicted in the 2020 race.
Yeah, Elaine, there's so much to dig into. Any Democrat that was counting on Texas tonight, and really even Florida, I tell you, most of the people who I talk to within the Democratic establishment viewed those as nice to haves, but they weren't a part of the Biden win equation, right? Joe Biden can have plenty of paths to the presidency that don't involve Florida, Texas, even Georgia. There are a number of other states, North Carolina, which Joe Biden is looking really strong in right now. Even Ohio, where Joe Biden is surprisingly showing some strength. I saw Major talking about some of the exit poll numbers that look really, really strong for Biden coming out. So, and then, of course, there's that upper Rust Belt wall of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, where we know Biden has shown some enduring strength in the polls leading up to Election Day. So there's a lot of paths for Joe Biden. That's the value of having a lot of different ways that you can get to 270. Biden certainly has that, and there's nothing that we've seen tonight that changes that. I think Florida, for a lot of Democrats like me, Florida has been doing this to Democrats for probably my entire political lifetime. So there's really no surprise there. Even if you just go back to 2018, right? I remember we were sitting around a desk and Andrew Gillum was the candidate for governor, right? And a lot of people thought he was going to win, and we had a similar reaction. So nothing's really changed that would preclude Joe Biden from winning the presidency tonight.
All right. Well, Caitlin, in terms of campaign events, we have seen President Trump hit that campaign trail really with such an accelerated pace here in the final days before Election Day. We saw Joe Biden hit the campaign trail as well. What do the places where these candidates visited, what does that actually tell us about how each side is feeling and where it is that they are prioritizing their efforts?
Well, it certainly signals where they think the best path to victory is, or where they could potentially cut into their opponent's margins. It's been really striking to be on the ground here in Pennsylvania because this is well-trodden terrain by both of these candidates. Over the past couple of days, Pennsylvania voters have likely seen or heard about or seen in their local news a visit by these candidates. Several stops made by President Trump over the past couple of days, several stops made by Joe Biden, who returned back to Pennsylvania today, his hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania. He visited. I think that really shows you where this campaign feels they could potentially put this race away. If they can block off the president's path to victory here in Pennsylvania, they believe that they could block off his victory to the White House, the president's victory. But they also have been saying, the Biden campaign has been telling us that they don't need to have Pennsylvania if they can win some of these other states. That's why, because we may not have results here on election night in Pennsylvania, that's why we're looking at states like Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona. Keep an eye on those, and that will tell us kind of where this race is headed.
So, Leslie, we're not sure if the president is going to actually address the American people tonight. What is it you think is factoring into that decision, even though we obviously still don't have anywhere near any final results? Leslie, can you hear me? All right, I think we've lost our audio connection with Leslie. So, Caitlin, very quickly in our final minute here. So there are legal challenges that are expected here on both sides, right? Both of these campaigns have been preparing for that.
Absolutely. Both teams have a team of lawyers, and that's not out of the ordinary. But again, if it comes down to a state like where I am, where they're going to be potentially scrutinizing every ballot, that's where these legal challenges could come. The state Supreme Court here said that ballots can be accepted up to 3 days after Election Day, as long as they're postmarked by Election Day. Remember, that went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court kicked it back, but did not rule out potentially ruling on it after Election Day. So both campaigns teamed up to fight for every single vote if it comes down to it.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Leslie Sanchez, and Joel Payne, thank you all for joining us tonight. We are going to take a short break, but now is a good time to remind you can stay up to date by downloading our CBS News app. Stay with us. You're streaming CBSN. CBS News, always on.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Do you think that the president has the authority to send in active duty troops?
Face the questions you want answered.
Did the CDC let the American people down? Tell me about the decision. When was it made? Who made it? What is the next area that you are concerned about? What does that mean for the risk of reinfection here in the United States?
You bring up a very good point, Margaret.
Margaret, that's a great question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Go to the ends of the earth
Right now. We got something crazy.
and reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative,
Da-da-da-da.
and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
CBS News projects Joe Biden has won the state of Colorado. And welcome back to CBS News election headquarters in Times Square. We're coming up on 9:30 in the east, 6:30 in the west. Much riding on many of those battleground states, that notable 9 we had been talking about. I want to bring you up to date on what's happening because there's been some developments in several of the key states, including Florida, which is a must-win for President Trump. Our own Sarah Cook reporting at this hour that the Trump campaign is feeling increasingly confident that President Trump will be able to secure and win the Sunshine State, which is now, he has his own residency there now, as he has a place at Mar-a-Lago, the club there. I want to bring in Anthony Salvanto with new details about the Sunshine State. Anthony.
Okay, so Florida, right now, I want to show you what remains to be counted. 93% in. So what does the trailing candidate, as we always compute, need? 83% to catch up, okay? That does not bode well for Joe Biden indeed, Nora. I want to go back again to this Miami-Dade County number. 53% for Joe Biden. I was looking at this before. 63% for Hillary Clinton. But I will tell you that here at the decision desk, we look for patterns over and over again. What's going on? This is one of the few counties in Florida where Joe Biden is not at least matching Hillary Clinton's percent number. So that is unusual, at least in the context of what's going on tonight. Hillsborough, which is Tampa, Hillary Clinton got 51, Joe Biden 52. That's another example. Orlando, here we see Joe Biden at 61, Hillary Clinton at 60.4. So very similar everywhere except for Miami-Dade. But if that holds up, well, that's going to be one of the things that might cost Joe Biden the state.
All right, let's talk about North Carolina, another state where the Biden campaign had made a run in what is a traditionally Republican state where Barack Obama had won in 2008 by a very slim margin. Where does it stand now?
Yeah, so the first thing you always want to look at is, here's your raw vote, Joe Biden with a narrow lead. Here's what's counted so far, 80% of the vote. But the thing that's really interesting here is that so far we are breaking out the election day vote and the early vote. And I can tell you that the election day vote is running 69 to 30 for the president. Wow. And the early vote was going 53 to 46 for Joe Biden. So it's really that split that defines this as much as any geography. And then the question remains, what portion of this outstanding vote is either early or election day?
Can I just pause you?
I can probably tell you who will win.
Can I pause you right there? Yeah. Because on our conversations with people close to the Biden campaign, they had said, well, we've built up such a lead with all these early and absentee ballots. Donald Trump would have to win 60% of the vote on today. And it looks like that they are, that the Trump campaign is.
That's exactly right. You know, when you say that, he'd have to win 60%. It feels like a big number. But if the remaining electorate is overwhelmingly Republican, as it was, and Republicans turn out, it helps him close the gap.
Can we look at New Hanover County in North Carolina and what that's doing there?
Whoops, I just telestrated on that.
Because we're looking at some of these swing counties. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, swing counties, yes. But what we're really looking at here is a couple of key areas. And I just want to take a moment and look around the Charlotte area, because this is really what we're focusing on here at the decision desk. Because Charlotte, okay, we know that that's going to go blue. We know that that's going to be a Republican county. But it's Union County where Donald Trump, we think, is going to run up a big number. It's Gaston County, where I believe he held a rally recently. He's also got a large number. It's these exurbs and these suburbs around the central cities where Donald Trump really needs to make up the ground. And so far, it looks like he is. Also, you go further out from the Raleigh-Durham area. You go out into the further suburbs, and there we're still waiting for a lot of vote. So it's really those exurban areas. They are oftentimes Republican, and that is a central part of this game plan.
What is the outstanding vote that needs to be counted in Durham? I'm trying to... In North Carolina.
All of North Carolina.
In North Carolina, overall, we're looking at 1.1 million votes.
Yeah, but where do they come from, Anthony, in terms of...
Well, that's the thing. There are a few places where the counties haven't quite finished. So let me take, for example, a couple of blue counties, right? Raleigh, which is a big one. The outstanding vote there, well, 117,000 ballots. That could accrue to Joe Biden. So that's part of the model when I overlay that. Having said that, though, we look at some of those larger counties that are more Republican, and you're going to see a lot of outstanding vote, 131,000 votes in a place like Union County, and that could accrue to the president. It's one reason why we couldn't call the race right now.
Okay. And I think
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I think, do you have something more in North Carolina, or should I flip over to Ohio?
No, well, it's just the battle of the big counties. Whereas the story in Florida is the president reaching into the Democratic stronghold in Miami-Dade. It looks like here what's happening in North Carolina is everybody's just maximizing their vote. The president looks like he may be maximizing it a little bit more than Joe Biden's maximizing his vote.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a look at Ohio, another important state at this hour. Okay. And I understand, look, we just have over half of the vote in, but according to our exit polls, and help me out here as I pull this up, Joe Biden was actually doing well with some non-college educated white men in the state of Ohio, I believe. No, I'm sorry, I did not. I had the state wrong. Forgive me, but go ahead.
Michigan.
Sorry, Michigan he's doing. We'll talk about Michigan.
Anthony, stay in Ohio.
Yeah, sure.
Head towards Cincinnati, if you would, because the Biden team is telling me they seem to be performing better in the Cincinnati area and its suburbs than Hillary Clinton did 4 years ago. Is that what you're seeing?
So start in Hamilton, okay, and that's better than Hillary Clinton, okay, so that's part of it, all right. But you go out to Butler County, that's a suburb, trends Republican, okay. There's Biden, there's Hillary Clinton.
So he's doing a little better.
10 points better. So the answer to that, the short answer to that is yes. Is it enough? We'll see. Because the other part of the state that I would point you to is up north around Cleveland. And it's these areas up around Cleveland. I'm going to show you a kaleidoscope of red and blue, the way that is trending right now.
You know,
Joe Biden doing okay, but maybe not.
I love politics, but this is getting a little in the weeds, so maybe broaden us back out, John.
Well, the only thing I would say is that in all these counties, in Hamilton, Cuyahoga, there's only 50-some-odd% in, right? And does that take us back to our early vote versus day of vote storyline from the evening?
It does indeed. It does indeed. So like Cuyahoga, for example, 52% in, still over 300,000 votes left to count. And that's really the way you do the math right now. What's remaining and what does a trailing candidate need to catch up?
And for Trump in Ohio, the narrative seems to be from the data that it's the white, non-college educated men who are sticking with him and really being led by his appeal on the economy, the perception that he is stronger for them in that Rust Belt state. It may be a perception, given that many of the trade deals he promised over the past 4 years were only partially delivered on. Right? He got the new North American free trade deal, but anything outstanding with China, he hasn't delivered on. But it's the promise, and it's something Joe Biden had hoped to eat away at.
We've got some exit polls coming up from the states of Ohio and Michigan that's going to tell us how many of these voters are breaking. Coming up, we'll update the state of the race. You're watching CBS News 2020, America Decides.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Do you think that the president has the authority to send in active duty troops?
Face the questions you want answered.
Did the CDC let the American people down? Tell me about the decision. When was it made? Who made it? What is the next area that you are concerned about? What does that mean for the risk of reinfection here in the United States?
You bring up a very good point, Margaret.
Margaret, that's a great question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Go to the ends of the earth
Right now. We got something crazy.
and reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Welcome back to our election night coverage. Polls have started closing in dozens of states as Americans await the results of the 2020 election. Most of the early battlegrounds are still considered toss-ups between President Trump and Joe Biden as votes continue to be counted. The president is performing well in Florida while Joe Biden is showing strength in North Carolina. All eyes are on the Midwest and Pennsylvania, which are crucial to both candidates' paths to victory. Lana Zach is at the board. Lana, what's the latest?
Hey there, Elaine. In the race to 270 right now, Biden a little bit ahead at 89 compared to Trump's 63 electoral votes projected for the two gentlemen right now. Again, you can't read too much into that because look at all of this white that we have otherwise on the board. So many swing states potentially that both of the candidates have been really wooing. And one thing that's particularly interesting is that Minnesota is now a leaning Biden state. That's important, obviously, because that's one of the states that went away from Hillary Clinton, that had gone for Biden, Obama in the last couple of elections, that they have been trying so hard to woo back. So the fact that it's now leaning towards Biden is a big deal. Now, the other thing that's very important to the Democrats and the Republicans tonight is not just this big board in the presidential race, but it's the Senate race. As you know, Democrats are trying to win the Senate. They're defending less seats as incumbents, so that helps them out a little bit. Republicans right now a little bit ahead in that count. 6 Senate seats now projected to go towards Republican candidates, 5 to Democrats. As you see, they're basically all the incumbents. Let's go ahead and run down those for our viewers. Let's start off. Let's start with the Republicans. In South Dakota, Mike Rounds a solid South Carolina projection there. Let's go next. Kentucky, Mitch McConnell looks like is assured of his seat there. And what's interesting about this is obviously Mitch McConnell trying to maintain his position as majority leader. So we know at least he's going to be seated in the Senate, it looks like. Whether or not he's able to still control the Senate is still a question. In Oklahoma, Senator Jim Inhofe looks to be the projected winner there. In Tennessee, we got Bill Hagerty. In West Virginia, Shelley Moore Capito. And in Arkansas, Tom Cotton holding on to his seat. On the Democratic side, we have New Hampshire, Jeanne Shaheen. In Massachusetts, Ed Markey, who was in a very tough primary battle, as you know, assured of his Senate seat there. In Delaware, Chris Coons, our projected winner, holding on to his seat there. In New Jersey, Cory Booker also looking to maintain his seat. And finally, the one that just came in right now, do we have that control room? Nope, we do not have that yet. But we're going to be watching it. As you know, it's all a fluid situation.
It definitely is. Lana, Zach, thank you so much for taking us through some of the data tonight. We're going to check back with you throughout the course of the evening. Now, in the battle for the Senate, we want to let our viewers know who are keeping close track of that. I'm sorry, control room, say it again. Okay, there we have it. So CBS News projects that John Hickenlooper is the winner, a Democrat, for that Senate seat in Colorado. Now, why does that matter? Because we know, of course, as Lana's just pointed out, there is a question about whether or not Democrats will be able to, whether Republicans will be able to retain control over the Senate and whether Democrats will be able to flip it. So here now you have John Hickenlooper, the winner in Colorado. So we're going to continue to bring you CBS News projections as they come in. Meantime, the coronavirus pandemic did not deter millions of Americans from showing up to the polls in person today to cast their ballots. Many voters were met with long lines, technical issues, and even some misinformation. But the country is still on course to set a record for highest voter turnout in more than a century. For more on this, we have our team of CBS News campaign reporters on the ground. Zach Hudak joins us from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Adam Brewster is in Grosse Pointe Park, Michigan, and Lecrae Mitchell is in Tampa, Florida. Do we have you? I don't see you yet, but Zach, if you can hear me, I want to start with you there in Pittsburgh. As we know, Pennsylvania is a key state. There you are, for both Biden and Trump. Millions of residents have already voted there by mail. What have people been saying about why they chose to vote in person rather than by mail?
Well, Elaine, I've been at a lot of Trump rallies recently because he has been here quite a lot recently. Yeah. And I've talked to, a few hundred voters between all of them, I would say. I've asked every one of them, will they vote in person? Will they vote by mail? I have not had a single one, except for one who was going to be out of state, who was voting absentee, which in Pennsylvania, that's a different thing. That is with an excuse. Mail-in is no excuse, and that is the big change this year. But not a single one of them said that they're going to vote by mail, and they said that was because they don't trust it. They just want to be there. They want to see that they're getting it in. Now, on the other hand, though, Democrats, we saw well over 1 million of them apply to vote by mail, twice as many as Republicans. And it really is a split. And Elaine, that's part of the reason that we could very well see Donald Trump pull ahead at some point tonight, and then in the following days or following hours, that lead becomes less, or Joe Biden pulls ahead. Or if Biden is ahead tonight, his lead widens after tonight.
Yeah, well, I wonder what you're hearing, if anything, about robocalls that some voters received warning them to stay away from the polls today.
I have not heard about the robocalls, Elaine, but what is happening rapidly here, in fact, like just before we started talking, is court challenges. There was just another led by Mike Kelly, representative, a Republican representative from the state, that are challenging the systems in place in counties to remedy ballots, mail ballots that were incorrectly filled out or incorrectly submitted. This is the second Republican attempt today to make an equal protections claim that those ballots, that because all counties are not handling them exactly the same, none of them can be used. That's something we're going to see playing out in the coming days. And in addition, that extension that I talked about, the 3-day extension, Donald Trump, his campaign have talked about appealing. The state legislature, the state Republican Party has appealed it. And we could very well get a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court that could affect up to hundreds of thousands of ballots that arrive in the coming days.
All right. Well, Lecrae, I want to turn to you next. What is the view from Florida? How have voters in Florida been reacting to the coronavirus precautions at the polls?
Well, I'll tell you, Elaine, I was at the Pinellas County, one of the polling sites in Pinellas County today, Pinellas County being one of 4 counties that voted for President Obama and then voted for President Trump in 2016. And I saw masks wearing by some and others didn't have them on. Half of the voters that I spoke with today were wearing masks, but there were also supporters for both campaigns waving flags and signs today. And I'll tell you, I spoke with some Trump supporters who didn't have on masks and who seemed to be comfortable without those masks on. What I have heard when I have been reporting at different rallies throughout the past few weeks here in the state, in particular, even with senior voters here, is that when it's an outdoor event, they feel comfortable to not have their mask on sometimes. And if a person doesn't feel comfortable not having it on, they say that you should wear it. I will say that this tracks with what we've seen in the state. Florida has continued to be one of those states that has lifted most of its COVID-19 restrictions. You saw at the end of September, Governor DeSantis sign an executive order that, for the most part, allowed a lot of different businesses and restaurants to get back to operation. And so what we've seen here in these past few weeks, even with this election, is that some people are comfortable not having it on. And we've seen that in rallies, like I said, but also at polling sites like the one that I was at today.
And Lecrae, you say that you were there in Pinellas County in Florida today. What are you hearing about returns there?
So I'll tell you, it was interesting talking to both Trump supporters and Biden supporters because obviously, they both think that their candidate is going to take this state. And I'll tell you, this is a state that is known for elections that have narrow margins. And what we saw in 2016 is that President Trump won the state by just over 1% or 112,000 votes. When President Obama won the state, he won the state twice, but both times within, less than 3%. And so this is a state where margins matter. And what we heard from Trump supporters today is that he has this in the bag. And what Biden supporters say is that they hope that he's gonna fare well. This is what we do know. Early this morning, there were 9 million votes that had already been cast in this state, where 14.4 million people are registered to vote. We also know that the president spent a lot of time here this year, 16 visits to the state throughout the year. And so this was a state that he knew he needed to do well in, and this is a state where he spent a lot of time and money. Both campaigns, by our analysis within the political unit, both campaigns spent more money in Florida than in any other state in advertising. And so this is a state that has remained important throughout this election, and we'll see tonight how things shake out.
Well, Adam, I want to turn to you. Michigan, as you know, we've talked about this many times, is of great interest for many reasons, but it's one of 21 states to allow same-day voter registration. Now, this wasn't possible in 2016, but how is same-day registration impacting this election?
Well, we'll see how it shakes out. The Secretary of State's office on the last call that they did tonight with reporters said more than 24,000 people registered today. And that can be people adjusting their registration if you moved within the past few years. But we saw that number climb in the later hours of the day, something we also saw back in March during the presidential primary when a bunch of college kids showed up to register to vote in the final hours of that day. Secretary of State said today Detroit, of course, the biggest city in the state, had the most same-day registrants. Ann Arbor, a large college town, had a number. They were the second highest. Grand Rapids, Lansing, and Kalamazoo were up there. We'll see where those late breakers go, whether it was new people, whether it was young people. We don't quite know yet. But either way, a lot of people deciding today, and some of them late in the day, that it was time to finally get off the couch and get out there and register to vote and cast their ballot.
Okay, so with all that said, how long do officials think it will take to count?
Well, the Secretary of State in Michigan has said for a while, we think it could take until Friday to count every last vote in Michigan. That's because Michigan is having record absentee voting, just like we've seen in every other state, essentially throughout the country this year. And it's double what they saw in the August primary, which was the previous high. 3.24 million was the last update we had in terms of absentee ballots cast in the state of Michigan. And so clerks only got 10 hours yesterday if they were in big cities to get started on counting. That being said, the Secretary of State's office has been optimistic that things are going quite well. The Detroit City Clerk spoke a little while ago and seemed optimistic about how they are doing in the processing of absentee ballots. Have processed about 120,000 of their ballots that they'd received of about 170,000. So things could be going faster and moving a little quicker than the Secretary of State had expected. She said things were moving efficiently. Her office said that it was just quite well. Oakland County, a major suburban county in Detroit. So we could get a better picture sooner than Friday, perhaps for every vote to be counted. Of course, depending on the margins, Elaine, we know this, it doesn't necessarily take every single vote to be counted to decide the presidential race. When you get down into school board races, county commissioner races, state legislative races, you might need to wait until every single last vote is counted. The tighter the margins is, the longer it may take to call Michigan at the presidential level.
All right, let's bring into this conversation another campaign reporter, Alex Tin, joining us from Glendale, Arizona. So, Alex, what has Election Day been like there where you are?
Well, the story in Arizona in some ways is not that different than the battleground states all around the country, and that's record turnout. Both record turnout before Election Day even happened. I mean, there were more voters that voted early here in the state of Arizona than the entire total of all the voters who cast ballots in Arizona in 2016. But that record turnout continued into today. We saw long lines all around the state, including right here in Maricopa County. This polling site, actually, that I'm behind, this polling site was supposed to close more than 1 hour ago, but there were hundreds of people waiting in line, and they wanted to cast their ballot. And because of this and all these other locations, we still have people waiting in line to cast their ballots right here in the state of Arizona, including right here behind me.
Wow, so interesting. Now, Alex, we heard some reports in some states, including Arizona, that there were some technical hiccups at the polls. How much of an impact did those issues actually have, and how big of an issue were they actually?
Well, it's hard to assess, how much exactly was that impact. But, when I was talking with some of the folks who were volunteering here behind me, the folks who were volunteering and telling people, stay in line, make sure your vote gets counted. Do you want any water? Are you getting thirsty? Those volunteers told me that there was an issue actually right here at this location with their ballot printer, and they think that contributed to the delays. But there are all kinds of other issues that have contributed to delays here in this state and in other neighboring states, including in nearby Nevada. Some of it is people just don't know that there are other polling sites with shorter lines. Another thing that happens, especially close to the end of the closing of polls, is that you get people who show up, they're ready to cast their ballot, they see that the line is long, but they're afraid of leaving the line because they fear that if they leave this line and go to another polling location, they won't get to that other polling location in time for that polling location to close. And so what you end up having is kind of in that last 30, 45 minutes before the polls close, voters showing up, getting in these huge long lines, and everyone around them telling, stay in line, cast your ballot here, don't risk it and go to another location. Just wait and do your civic duty.
Interesting. All right. Well, Zach, you reported earlier about some polling machine issues in Scranton. Did the delays there have any impact on voter turnout?
Not on voter turnout, Elaine, but it did have an impact on when polls closed there. That is the only place in the state that we're aware of where polls did not close at 8 p.m. Two precincts based in the same elementary school there held off for an extra 45 minutes, the same amount of time that machines were shut down, just to make sure that everyone got through. But from reports on the ground there, they were not overwhelmed even withstanding that. But I would point out, Elaine, that reports there and in neighboring Luzerne County say that there was huge turnout. I mean, this is anecdotal. This is based on just lines and what was expected. But these are counties that were traditionally Democratic. Lackawanna, where Scranton is, was still Democratic in 2016, but that have really been shifting red. Luzerne, next to it, where Wilkes-Barre is, accounted for the vote swing there, accounted for more than half of President Trump's margin of victory in the state. So those are places where if there is big in-person turnout, it's going to look good tonight for President Trump. But we have to keep in mind, there's going to be places like Philadelphia, which has over 400,000 mail-in votes already to count, that they're going to be counting for days to come.
Yeah. All right. In our final minutes here, Lecrae, I want to go back to you in Florida. Any reports of any kind of issues at all, or what have you been hearing with respect to how Election Day has gone in the state?
Well, earlier today, but one of the first briefings that Secretary of State Laurel M. Lee gave, she talked about how, for the most part, things were on track and things have been moving smoothly. What we've seen in the later part of the day here is that in Osceola County, for example, there has been a report of an internet outage that could cause a delay in when election results are announced. And so our CBS affiliate in Orlando has reported that. We are working to independently confirm ourselves. But, you know, it is worth noting, Elaine, as we talk about Florida, as we talk about the history here, you know, this is definitely a state where leading up to this, you had people who were going to be looking at specific counties, counties like Broward County, that has a history of sometimes elections not going as planned, even as recent as the 2018 midterm election that ended up leading in the Broward County supervisor of election resigning. So we'll keep looking at how things move along here in the state.
All right. Thank you all so much. Let's take you now to CBS News Special Report. And welcome back to CBS News Election Headquarters in New York. It's coming up at 10 o'clock in the East, 7 in the West. And in a matter of seconds, the polls will close in 4 more states, including Iowa. That is one of our notable 9, the states that could decide this election. Iowa has been reliably Republican. Biden came in 4th there in the primary, but the Biden campaign believes that the state of Iowa is in play. It is still too soon to tell which way the battleground states will break tonight, and control of the United States Senate still up for grabs. An exciting finish for an unprecedented election. More than 101 million Americans having cast their ballots today. So many big issues at stake: the economy and coronavirus. And at this hour, CBS News can report that Iowa joins a long list of toss-up states. I know. We wish we could tell you more. Utah is likely for President Trump. Montana is leaning toward the president. Nevada is leaning toward Biden. This is a race for 270 electoral votes. Right now, Joe Biden leads President Trump 89 to 72. And we now have a race update at this hour. Look as the map is starting to get filled in. Right now, CBS News is going to characterize Florida as leaning toward President Trump. Anthony Salvanto is going to explain why we're characterizing it that way.
Okay, so the really Florida in some ways starts and ends right now in Miami-Dade. And the issue here is, for Joe Biden, that at 53% in this very large county where Democrats always need to do well, he's winning, but he's not winning by enough. If I compare that to what Hillary Clinton got in 2016, even as she lost the state, she got a lot more votes. So he's underperformed there. But what's really interesting is that it's one of the only counties where he has underperformed tonight. If you go county by county elsewhere and compare, let's say, Broward, right? Clinton 66, Biden 64. Okay, that's pretty comparable. Palm Beach 56. Clinton 56. So you see that pattern. Here at the desk, we look for those patterns, and that Miami-Dade is one outlier. But having said that, there's an awful lot of votes there. And so at this point, I would say Donald Trump certainly has an edge. You see the total vote there. And I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to overlay our modeled estimate, which is what could happen if these trend lines continued. OK, and Donald Trump might still hold on. That's a modeled estimate that I'm giving you right now. So all of that points to a pretty good sign for Donald Trump in Florida right now.
All right. And his panhandle counties are coming in a little stronger. Like Escambia, Anthony, is coming in a little better for Trump than it did last time.
Yeah.
So if Joe Biden is not doing well where his vote needs to come in, Donald Trump is doing a little bit better where his vote needs to come in.
Right. So see there, you get 56. I'll go back to 2016, 58. So that's about tracking right there. But it's also, I've got to add this. You can go apples to apples from county to county in those comparisons, but you also want to look at the total vote, because there's going to be more votes cast in Florida tonight than there were in 2016. And I think a big part of that is going to be the Republican turnout, which has really surged on Election Day. And one of the things we're going back and forth on here is how much of what's outstanding is Election Day and how much of it is early.
That's right. And real quick, just want to show everybody North Carolina right now, because it is razor thin in the Tar Heel state. Oh, look at that.
Yep. Very close. Okay, very close. And the other thing I'll do here is I'm going to overlay the model. And what I mean is we're going to take the trend lines, how Joe Biden has done compared to past Democrats, how the president has done compared to himself. I'm going to overlay that, and it just goes narrowly just a little bit more towards Joe Biden. So I'm not ready to give him a lead status yet, but it certainly is headed that way, even if by the slimmest of margins.
All right, Anthony Salvanto, thank you. Want to bring in Valerie Jarrett and Reince Priebus. They join us now. Jarrett was senior advisor to former President Barack Obama, and Reince Priebus was President Trump's chief of staff. And Valerie, let me start with you. We see Florida now leaning toward Trump. What are you hearing from the Biden campaign?
Well, it's tight, most definitely. But I think their confidence comes from states such as Michigan and Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. North Carolina would be a bonus. And so it's early, but as you said, Florida's pretty tight. And I think that they're really banking on the states up in the upper north border.
Yeah. Interesting. There are still many more pathways for Biden to win the presidency early yet in the night. And Reince is former chairman of the RNC. I know you have a handle on all the numbers, too. So Trump will need more than Florida, however, to win the presidency. What are you hearing about those other upper Midwest states that the Biden campaign feels confident about?
You bet. Well, things do look good in Florida. And I've got to tell you, I mean, at this point, we're 400,000 votes ahead, still counting in the panhandle. So I think the Trump campaign, the feeling, they're starting to grin just a little bit, not a full on. But, I mean, think about this. We've got Florida in the right direction. The president has Georgia in the right direction. North Carolina's too close to call. But as votes are being counted, North Carolina is moving in the right direction. They started with early vote. In Wisconsin, Trump is ahead. The president's ahead in Michigan. However, you bring up a good point. What ballots are you counting? I've been told that counties in Wisconsin are counting whatever votes they'd like to first. I've also heard that in Milwaukee, they're counting Election Day ballots first and early votes second. So there's some confusion in Wisconsin as far as what's going first and what's going second. In Ohio, the guidance from the state is that they're counting early votes first, which is why you saw Vice President Biden get up ahead of the president, and now slowly but surely that's bleeding back to the president. Look, the polls called President Trump pretty much dead and buried in almost every one of these states. Not all of them, Ohio for sure, but certainly it's moving into a direction that is much more favorable for the president than what was anticipated. And I think that trend is likely to continue. We'll see. There's a couple of traps along the way. We'll see how it goes.
Valerie, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, look, I think Ryan says right. It is early, and we'll see. And it does matter whether or not you're counting the early vote. But I do think we should pause and say what a tremendous outpouring we had of early vote all around the country in the middle of a COVID-19 where people were worried about putting themselves in harm's way. And so the fact that we do have so many people who showed up to vote, I think speaks volumes about our country and the interest in this election.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, Valerie.
You know, Nora, one of the interesting things here is that what you're also seeing, at least early on here, okay, I understand we've got a big country, got a long way to go, but early on, what you're seeing is that this enormous high voter turnout is not hurting Trump, it's helping President Trump. So far, that's the case. The wisdom used to be that this huge higher voter turnout would help Democrats. So far, that's not the case tonight.
Mm-hmm. I want to just pull back up the board on Wisconsin because I know that you're from Kenosha, Reince, and just show that. And I know you were just there in the state, I believe, last night with the president. These early votes coming in now are the day of votes. Wisconsin is a huge mail-in state, and they are slow to count those there. So that could explain the disparity in that vote. Would you concede that, Reince?
Sure, I would definitely concede that we just don't know in Wisconsin, in Michigan, the order by which these ballots are going to be counted. There was no specific state guidance given in Wisconsin and Michigan as to how the ballots would be counted or which order they would be counted. Some states, it's clear how they're coming in because there's guidance from the state. In those two states, it's just not the case.
All right, Reince Priebus, Valerie Jarrett, thank you for those updates from both sides. We appreciate it.
Nora, I think that Valerie raises a very interesting point about the turnout. I mean, the American people are speaking up, regardless of how you're feeling about either candidate. They're speaking up because you really are looking at a case of two Americas. And I think that's what's troubling or encouraging, depending on where you're coming from. And I think, John, when you think of the two Americans, what are we looking at here?
Well, on some issues, like let's say the most important issue to most people, which is coronavirus, or at least the polls that showed that coming into Election Day, you see people who see it as a public health issue, and then you see others who believe it's a part of personal liberty, that they shouldn't have their personal liberty infringed on by the state, and that as a result of that infringement, the economy has gone into the tank. And so it's not just a question of economy versus health. It gets at these very, very, very basic elements of personal freedom that President Trump put his finger on in 2016 and has a connection with his voters that goes right to that, and that is at the heart of American.
But I was also thinking about the two different types of men. I mean, these are two different types of men that put on two very different campaigns, and America is responding, seeing, it seems, on both sides.
And that's why everybody is tuning in. They want to know how those voters are going to, who's going to turn out and ultimately win this presidency tonight, because it is about a contest of values. It is a contest of character. It is a contest about the direction that we want to head in this country. And that's why people are still watching and nervous at home, waiting for us. And that's why we're giving you every single detail we have as we can.
You've heard people say that democracy is on the ballot. Democracy.
Well, and democracy is working really, really well, by the way. We've got lots of people voting. We're this far into the night without having to break into some. I mean, democracy has won really well in this process. But we were talking about if you look at where President Trump is strong with basically blue-collar voters, people who think their future is better in his hands. He's going to fight for them. He's not going to sign up for these bad trade deals. Then you see white college women who are leaving the president and going to Joe Biden. They think their future of their kids and is going to be worse under President Trump, and they find him offensive. So those are the two Americas when you think about not how one group splits between the two, but how each candidate has power in different groups.
Nora, I just wanted to flag for you, because Florida is such an important state, that Homeland Security, which has been doing regular briefings, is acknowledging an internet outage in Osceola County, Florida, but said it has been resolved because they're actually driving the results from their to another location. So if some of that data is pokey and coming in, perhaps that's a factor. But their Secretary of State had said that there was a lot of cyber activity that has been detected, but Homeland Security saying their defense has worked.
The big story tonight is, of course, the huge unprecedented turnout and, of course, the slow counting in some places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And I want to bring in and check in with our CBS News election law expert, David Becker. David, you heard what Reince Priebus was saying about the vote counts in the upper Midwest. Clarify, if you could, what we know.
So what's happening is when someone goes in on Election Day to vote in the polling places in states, those go right into scanners, and they're ready to report out very shortly after the polls close. But specifically in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, all of the early and absentee ballots, they were stacking up, and they could only start being processed today. And by processing, that means they're reviewing the outside of the envelope. Once they've validated the ballot, they remove the ballot from the envelope, and only then can it go into a scanner. So there's going to be a natural delay in reporting a lot of those early and absentee ballots in those 3 states, whereas we're going to get the Election Day votes earlier in all 3 states.
David, I have a question about our whole system and ballot counting and how we vote. This just seems insane to me that we're sitting here 3 hours later, 4 hours later, and we can't get we can't get a count. Do you ever envision a day where there's a uniform count in this country?
Well, it certainly would be nice. We do have to remember that we're trying to count 150 million or so ballots in just a few hours, and that's really hard to do in a process that's being run by millions of volunteers. But, you know, the advantage that states like Florida, for instance, have, and North Carolina, is that the laws in those states allow those ballots to be processed, the early and mail ballots to be processed prior to Election Day. So they were ready to go. We're going to get results, nearly complete results from those states tonight, whereas Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, they didn't have laws that were as flexible and amenable for election officials to process these earlier.
All right, David Becker, thank you. And as he points out, done by volunteers, maybe 150 million votes. Democracy takes time. It does not mean that the process is rigged or that there's something or fraud going on. It just takes time to do that. Also, an update for you right now. CBS News can now characterize Texas as leaning toward President Trump. There's a lot more to come, including projections and the state of the race. You're watching CBS News 2020. America Decides.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Do you think that the president has the authority to send in active duty troops?
Face the questions you want answered.
Did the CDC let the American people down? Tell me about the decision. When was it made? Who made it? What is the next area that you are concerned about? What does that mean for the risk of reinfection here in the United States?
You bring up a very good point, Margaret.
Margaret, that's a great question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
It's not just left and right.
What are the most vulnerable issues for both President Trump and for Joe Biden?
It's not just wrong and right.
What is the pitch to voters?
The biggest pitch is going to be the economy.
Our politics don't have to divide us. They can unite us.
Healthcare is an animating issue for voters.
This is why we're here, to help make sense of the most important issues in America.
Thank you for helping to bring clarity on election night.
Watch Red and Blue, weeknights at 5 on CBSN.
This could be the worst that you've ever seen. Fires are going to get worse, and hurricanes are going to get worse, and they already are.
Firefighters struggle to contain over 600 wildfires.
Do not let go.
Thousands of people evacuated.
It's hard to find a place that has not been affected.
This is Hurricane Wolf. Behind me, you can see that we are in the eye wall.
Download the free CBS News app to watch.
everyone, I'm Elaine Quijano. It's just past 10:15 p.m. here on the East Coast, and polling locations continue to close across the U.S. Polls closed in just 4 states this hour: Iowa, Montana, Nevada, and Utah. This is shaping up to be a historic election in more ways than one. More than 101 million Americans cast their vote before Election Day. That's over 73% of the total votes cast in 2016. Here is a look at the current state of the race. CBS News projects President Trump will win Alabama, North Dakota, and South Carolina, and that Joe Biden will win New Jersey, Connecticut, Maryland, and Colorado. For the latest, Lana Zach is at the board. Lana?
Elaine, so when you look at it at first glance, it might look like Biden is having a very good night. He's leading on the leaderboard right now, 89 projected electoral votes to 72 for the president. But I want to show you something. When we start adding in these states in which it looks likely, where they're leaning towards either the president or towards Biden, with the addition of Florida and Texas now into that leaning category for President Trump, that gives him a much bigger advantage when we're looking towards that path to 270. By my math, the president only needs to pick up 85 electoral votes from this column, whereas the vice president would need to pick up, look at me working this board, 121 electoral votes from this column, the pure toss-ups. And remember, Elaine, a lot of these states, we are not going to know what is happening in Pennsylvania, likely for several days. Pennsylvania, obviously, with its 20 electoral votes, going to be very important. Also, Ohio, with its 18 electoral votes. As we're looking at all of this math and seeing how things are changing every moment, what's obvious to me, Elaine, is that this is going to be a squeaker, that both men look like they are hanging on with a clear path for either one of them if they can turn the tides in their favor in this column. But really, this has to be a big blow to the Biden-Harris ticket, to see Florida and Texas, two of the biggest states in terms of electoral votes, now leaning towards President Trump. Elaine.
All right, Lana Zach, thank you. We will be checking in with you throughout the night. For more, let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns, Linda Tran, and Leslie Sanchez. Caitlin is our CBSN political reporter. Linda is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist, and Leslie is a CBS News political analyst. Great to see you all. All right, so Caitlin, let me start with you. The U.S. could potentially see its highest voter turnout in a century this election. What is contributing to these record-breaking numbers?
Well, that's a great thing to have all of these voters participating. It shows that the system is working, that people are engaged in this election and engaged in a process that has a real big impact on their daily lives. So seeing this involvement and seeing this early involvement is a very positive development at this stage. What has created such an interest in voting this time around, I think, is because of the coronavirus pandemic. Several months ago, when the pandemic was in its early stages, there was this question about how to conduct elections in this kind of environment. And lots of states either ramped up or expanded their absentee voter program to allow people options to cast ballots. Other states expanded the number of days that people could vote early. And I think that this really put a highlight on, kind of gave a civics lesson to everybody about the importance of voting, about the importance of knowing how to cast your ballot. We've talked to lots of voters on the ground in various key battleground states who have said that they have learned a lot about this process, that they're engaged in a way that they haven't been before, and that they were kind of studying and monitoring apps and the like to make sure their ballot was in to be counted, because it meant that much to them.
Well, the U.S. Postal Service missed a deadline set by a federal judge earlier today to sweep facilities in 12 postal districts for remaining mail-in ballots. Now, this order came days after a judge mandated the USPS implement extraordinary measures to get those ballots delivered on time. Linda, talk to us about the role mail-in ballots have played in this election, especially for Joe Biden, who appeared to take the lead in early voting.
Well, clearly, mail-in ballots were a critical part of helping folks navigate in this pandemic world that we're living in to make sure that they knew that there was a safe way for them to exercise their right to vote. We also have to take a step back, though, and consider that there are a number of states that have exclusively done mail-in balloting for a very long time. Washington State happens to be one of them. And, of course, we've been doing mail-in ballot voting since the Civil War. And it's a critical way that members of our armed services, the men and women of our armed services, are able to cast their ballots as well. In 2016, we saw 252,000 ballots come in from the military. And so it's obviously a system that we've used to a great extent in the past. And in this cycle, we've seen the numbers drive up dramatically. In the early vote period, we saw that in states that reported the information, Joe Biden had Democrats had somewhat of an advantage. But we always knew that on Election Day, the vast majority of Donald Trump supporters were planning to vote in person. And so what I think we're witnessing right now is a little bit of that red mirage we've been talking about. And it is worth calling out that, while Florida and Texas may be leaning towards Donald Trump, those are must-win states for him, but not must-win states for Joe Biden.
Yeah, I was going to just ask you about that, so I'm glad you addressed that, Linda. You read my mind. All right, well, most polls have closed already, but when we will see a final result is still, of course, very much up in the air. Leslie, what are the states that we should be looking at for possible insight into how this all might play out eventually?
So we still have to wait and see, Elaine, how Florida is going to turn out. I mean, hopefully we'll see that very soon. But that's a very important state, not only for demographic changes, and you're seeing what's happening in areas like Miami-Dade, but also because you see that Biden did have slight improvements, 2 and 3 points on the margins, all the way up along the coast on both sides of the state. Is that going to replicate itself along the kind of the blue-collar Rust Belt? That's the question Republicans are asking themselves right now. Looking at Texas, and now we've moved into the kind of lean Republican, I'd still call it ruby red, for a lot of reasons. That of the 254 counties in Texas, about 230 are solid Republican, and they're very rural. They come in very late traditionally, 2, 3 a.m., that you see those results, and that's what flips it back. But there's no doubt there's a lot of changes there. And we're going to see ultimately there's a win for Republicans in North Carolina. They're going to have the youngest Republican member now, 25 years old, who won his seat in North Carolina. So we're seeing some small victories, but how the map is going to be moving at those margins is really what we're going to be watching as we move up toward the Rust Belt.
Well, the race in Iowa is a toss-up. Now, President Trump won the state back in 2016, but this year his support among voters with college degrees slipped. So, Caitlin, how did the two candidates' campaigns differ in that state of Iowa?
That's right. The president would go to Iowa and campaign almost exclusively on the issue of trade. But Biden made a kind of a last-minute stop there a couple of days ago, which seemed to suggest that they may have seen some opportunities to gain some headway there. But that is a state that has that Donald Trump won by a significant margin in 2016, a state that he has returned to often as president. The states that we're looking at that could really be decisive here, of course, are Michigan, Wisconsin, and here where I am in Pennsylvania. These are states that delivered the White House to President Trump in 2016, and he won them all total by 80,000 votes. And that's why Democrats have been kind of on a mission to win them back in a way that's ramping up a different kind of coalition. And that's really what I'm looking for tonight, to see what the coalitions for these respective candidates are. Does Biden have the turnout among the Democratic base and try to replicate some of the Obama numbers that we saw in places like Philadelphia, where I am, in places like Detroit, and places like Milwaukee? Or do we see what we've been seeing a little bit in our exit polls and after the 2018 midterms, this kind of realignment within the Democratic Party and the Republican Party? Women, especially in the suburbs, college-educated voters moving away from the Republican Party and towards the Democrats. That could make a difference in those key states that I just mentioned, but also potentially in states like North Carolina and Arizona, states that will give us a good indication of where this race is headed tonight.
Yeah, Leslie, very quickly, I want to get your thoughts on Arizona, especially, right? This is a state that is, of course, the land of Barry Goldwater, John McCain, a place that in just a few years ago people would not have necessarily thought could be a place where a Democrat could be competitive in this way. As you look at the landscape now, we talk about changing demographics. What do you see in Arizona?
For many years, Elaine, the mountainous West was a territory, kind of a group of territories that the Republicans felt they could be really competitive in, including Arizona. If you included Nevada, if you put Colorado in that area, and it's certainly everything kind of in that region, Republicans thought they could, not only because of the growing Hispanic vote, if they could earn 37 to 40% of Hispanic vote, they knew they could win statewide. But Donald Trump has changed the calculus of that, and the focus shifted back over to the Rust Belt. And what you saw in kind of slippage in some of those states, you saw an increase in working class white voters. So the math is going to have to line up for him.
All right. Caitlin Huey-Burns, Linda Tran, and Leslie Sanchez. I'm so sorry we have hard breaks. We're going to take a quick break right now. Stay with us. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News Always On.
The biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Do you think that the president has the authority to send in active duty troops?
Face the questions you want answered.
Did the CDC let the American people down? Tell me about the decision. When was it made? Who made it? What is the next area that you are concerned about? What does that mean for the risk of reinfection here in the United States?
You bring up a very good point, Margaret.
Margaret, that's a great question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Todd.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
America decides. This is your night, and welcome back to CBS News Election Headquarters in Times Square. We're watching the returns come in from 44 states where the polls have closed across America. Let's take a look at the states we've been calling the notable 9 all night that may decide this election. Right now, Florida is the only of those notable 9 that we have leaning toward President Trump. All the others, North Carolina, Georgia, Ohio, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Iowa, those are all toss-ups. All right, let's check on the race to 270 electoral votes. And in that, Joe Biden leads 89 to 72. You might feel like it's late at home, 10:30 p.m. on the East Coast, but it is early on election night. Lots more votes to be counted because there is such an unprecedented vote out there. So the count just coming in.
And you know it's early because of those notable 9. Only Florida is the one that has any tinge of color to it. In all those states the president's defending, they're all toss-ups still, even though a lot of votes have come in.
Right.
And you guys know part of the fun of election night is watching the states tick off, so you can watch the red turn to blue or blue turn to red, and you're pulling for your candidate. And to hear it still early as we sit here at 10:30. When does it become late, Nora? Midnight, 1 a.m.?
I'm no longer on the morning schedule.
Yes, I know. I know. So
but you're usually asleep by now.
In 2016, it was, what, 2:45
Yes, we were here till 2:30.
That's
I remember that.
I do remember there were some hamburgers involved late in the middle of the night. But let me, as we were all together then. John, let's talk about Arizona, because that's a state where some of the vote is coming in. And I know you did that piece for 60 Minutes because it is unique in so many ways.
Well, it is, and it's changing, and that's what makes Arizona interesting. It's one of these states where Democrats hope, it's at the edge of their hopes. Of course, Georgia and North Carolina are too, but 300 new people a day move into Maricopa County. It's the #1 county in the country in size. When Donald Trump won it, it was the biggest county he won in 2016. So that's why Jamie was focusing on Maricopa County. But the important thing to remember about Arizona is while it looks like Joe Biden's got a lead, they count a lot of votes early. there are votes on Election Day. And as we've seen on the East Coast, the president's doing better on Election Day than in the mail-in vote. So if anybody wants to get their hopes up about Arizona moving from being a red Republican state to blue, you've got a lot of waiting to do.
Hey, John, how about that endorsement from Cindy Biden?
Cindy McCain.
Cindy McCain, yes. Yes, it's still Dr. Joe Biden. See, it is late. Yeah. I've been up since 3:24, Nora. This is late. But let's rewind. Let's go back to Cindy McCain's endorsement of Joe Biden. Longtime family friend.
Right.
But certainly on the other side of the aisle. Do you think that made a difference? She said, I hope that women will take a look and step over the line as I did.
We'll see. I mean, there are two parts of the Cindy McCain endorsement that are interesting. One is she said suburban women look at Donald Trump and they don't feel secure. Remember, the president was saying, I'll keep you safe.
Yes.
Don't worry about my personality. She said it's his personality that makes people feel unsafe.
Yes.
That's one of the conversations going on tonight as we talk about white college-educated women and them turning to Joe Biden and away from President Trump. The second thing is there's a change in the Republican Party in Arizona. They see their future with Donald Trump. Jeff Flake was bounced out of the party, essentially.
And endorsed Biden.
And Cindy McCain said, I didn't leave the Republican Party, it left me. Of course, the Republican Party says, well, which of our policies do you disagree with? If you just disagree with Donald Trump, well, that's a personality thing, but we still promote the same things. That's the debate going on inside Arizona.
Nora, well, you stand by. Yes, we have. Thank you, Margaret. Yes, CBS News has a projection at this hour, and that Joe Biden is the winner in the state of New Hampshire. Donald Trump had made a couple visits to try and win over voters there, but this is a state that is going to be in Joe Biden's column tonight, and those 4 electoral votes. And there is the national map at this hour. It is early yet, and not a lot of those electoral votes on the board just yet because of those notable 9 that we talked about, those states that are in white, outlined in black. Those will decide this election tonight. Florida, we have now leaning Trump. It could still flip back, but at this point we have it leaning Trump. Want to bring in our chief congressional correspondent, Nancy Cordes, because the other big story, battle for control of the United States Senate.
Yes, Nora, and we do have some news to report. The first and probably the only Republican pickup in the Senate for the night. CBS News is now projecting that Doug Jones will lose his Senate seat in the very red state of Alabama. He's going to be losing to Tommy Tuberville, who's a former Auburn football coach endorsed by the president, who campaigned for him. But Jones could get a consolation prize if Vice President Biden wins the presidency, because he's been discussed as a possible cabinet pick. Another big piece of news to report in the Lone Star State, Democratic hopes dashed there as well, because John Cornyn, we can project, will be the winner, and he will pick up a 4th term. Democrats had high hopes for the former military helicopter pilot MJ Hagar, but we're now projecting that John Cornyn is going to keep his seat. You'll recall that he sensed that he might need to create a little distance between himself and the president. He saw the president's poor poll numbers, and so he did an interview a couple of weeks ago where he said that his relationship with Mr. Trump was kind of like when you get married and you think you're going to be able to change your husband, but after 4 years or so, you realize you're not going to.
Yes, I know that. I know that tune. But do you think that President Trump will remember this?
I'm sure he seems to always remember when a member of Congress says something negative about him. But in this case, clearly John Cornyn was looking at the polls. They were neck and neck for Joe Biden and Donald Trump in Texas. And he thought, I need to show I am not in lockstep with Donald Trump, even though he has, for the most part, been over the past 4 years.
Stand by. We have an important race update right now. CBS News is now characterizing Arizona as leaning toward Biden. Now, this is a lean. It can change. But we want to check in with Anthony Salvanto, because this is a state that Donald Trump won in 2016. It is something that Joe Biden had wanted to add to the Democratic column as a safety against some of the other states. Explain what we're seeing, Anthony.
Part of a larger story across the Sun Belt, where a lot of these states that the president won pretty comfortably in 2016 are now in play. Okay, so Arizona at the moment in our models, this is why it's a lean, not a projection, in our models has Biden up. And a lot of that comes from, John, as you well know, Maricopa County. Now, this is where a majority of the votes are going to be cast in the state. And at the moment, you see Joe Biden with a lead. Well, if you get a lead in a place where the majority of the votes are going to be cast, that helps out. And then the other thing I'll show you is we're always watching tonight is what's been counted and what's outstanding. Yes, still 400,000 votes to go, but what we want to see here is, can Donald Trump make up the margin? At this point on the trend lines, it could be difficult for him. So that's why I want to just lean it for the moment. But that's where we are in Arizona, all about Maricopa County. We'll watch it going forward.
And why we are characterizing this state as lean, Biden, also has to do with what we're hearing from the exit polls and some of those voters. So I want to check in with Major Garrett about why people voted the way they did.
Exactly, Nora. There are two pieces of demographic data from Arizona that I think reveal why Anthony just moved this to a lean Biden. And again, this is exit poll data collected not just day of, but for those who voted early in person and who voted by mail and were then called by the exit poll surveyors. So let's go first to 65 and older in Arizona. Joe Biden leading President Trump 52 to 47. Donald Trump won this demographic group in Arizona by 13 points in 2016. So that is an 18-point swing in favor of the former vice president. Let's look at women in Arizona, our second board. Joe Biden, 53 to 44 over President Trump. Hillary Clinton won women in Arizona by 4 percentage points in the exit polls of 2016. So for women, he's doing better. That is to say, the former vice president. And among seniors, he's doing better. But I want to tell the table this, and I don't know if you're picking this up from your Democratic sources. I would describe this as a rare glimmer of good news. I'm hearing from more and more Democrats they are feeling concerned about the way this map is moving and that the president's assurance that his voters would show up on Election Day is proving true, not just in Florida, but other places. And they are increasingly concerned about the trend lines they're seeing in day of turnout.
And there are still Republican voters in line in Maricopa County, according to some of our producers out there. But one other good glimmer of hope for Biden in Arizona overall, he's leading among independents, 52 to 39%. Another example of him potentially drawing them over. But you're right. At this point, Biden campaign much more looking at that blue wall as they try to restore it, believing that their fortunes may rest up.
The early idea that Florida, Georgia, North Carolina would fall early is becoming less and less something that the Biden campaign is not only banking on, but even some sort of squinting look at the data and saying, well, it's maybe still possible. They are beginning to rule that out more and more as I hear from people and having to shift their focus entirely to Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin.
But you remember, Major, one of the most moving stories during the convention was the young woman from Arizona who talked about her father, who died of COVID, who I think she said
he was a Trump supporter.
He was a big Trump supporter and said his only problem, his only pre-existing condition was trusting Donald Trump. And she says, turned her pain into purpose.
And one other thing I've picked up in the last half hour, even though trending in Arizona toward Biden, there is some concern in Biden world about Nevada. And that was one thing the Trump campaign said would offset Arizona if they got wobbly there. So I just want to put that on the table.
And there has been concern about Nevada among Democrats for quite some time. That's a very difficult state given the economic condition of it. It relies on tourism. It's been struggling. And its politics rely on people actually having a job and being members of the unions out there in the hospitality industry, and they've struggled to be able to mobilize people. So it is a big possibility that Nevada could be closer than expected.
All right, so we're at that point of the night where people are saying, should I brew myself a pot of coffee?
Yes.
Yes.
Join us.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Answer yes.
Do it.
And could you bring some pizza?
Lots
I'm ready
more
to eat
ahead.
the table.
And at this hour, CBS News projects that President Trump has won Utah. That is a reliably Republican state there. There is a lot more still ahead. More poll closings, projections, and the state of the race. You're watching CBS News 2020. America decides.
the biggest names in politics.
Whoa, that's news. Do you think that the president has the authority to send in active duty troops?
Face the questions you want answered.
Did the CDC let the American people down? Tell me about the decision. When was it made? Who made it? What is the next area that you are concerned about? What does that mean for the risk of reinfection here in the United States?
You bring up a very good point, Margaret.
Margaret, that's a great question.
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Go to the ends of the earth
Right now. We got something crazy.
and reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
It's not just left and right.
What are the most vulnerable issues for both President Trump and for Joe Biden?
It's not just wrong and right.
What is the pitch to voters?
The biggest pitch is going to be the economy.
Our politics don't have to divide us. They can unite us.
Healthcare is an animating issue for voters.
This is why we're here, to help make sense of the most important issues in America.
Thank you for helping to bring clarity on election night.
Watch Red and Blue, weeknights at 5 on CBSN.
This could be the worst that you've ever seen. Fires are going to get worse, and hurricanes are going to get worse, and they already are.
Firefighters struggle to contain over 600 wildfires.
Thousands of people evacuated.
It's hard to find a place that has not been affected.
This is Hurricane Laura. Behind me, you can see that we are in the eye wall.
Download the free CBS News app to watch.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Welcome back to our election night coverage. The major battleground states that will decide the 2020 presidential election remain too close to call, as polls in most states have closed across the country. CBS News estimates that Florida moves from a toss-up to now leaning toward President Trump, while Nevada is leaning toward Joe Biden and Iowa is a toss-up. Lana Zach is at the board. Lana, what's the latest?
Hey there, Elaine. It is a dynamic night. We've been crunching the numbers and seeing how they changed. As you just gave us these updates, I want to show how that now impacts our likely map. Obviously, 86 electoral votes projected for President Trump. But when we add in the likely column, he's at 175. For Biden, now doing a little bit better than the last time we checked in. 93 projected electoral votes, 160 when you add in everything that's happening here on the leaning and likely category. So again, it comes down to these states. And I want to show you on the map what's really important about those states. Take a look at so many of these states that are going to be essential, potentially for Biden, but also important for President Trump. But particularly, we know that the Biden-Harris campaign has been focusing on the Rust Belt here, with the exception, obviously, of Minnesota, which Hillary Clinton won in the last election. Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania. These were states that Trump was able to flip away from being a Democratic stronghold to his side in the last go-around. So we're learning a little bit more now about the demographics and what's happening in those Rust Belt states, which is what I was really interested in. So I want to show you a little bit about the voters and the economy and how they feel in these 5 states here. Rust Belt voters think that the economy is not good or poor by a margin of 51 to 48%. That looks pretty tight, but I just want to note for you, Elaine, that puts the an emphasis, just with a slight emphasis, that it's worse in the Rust Belt, the feeling from voters there, than elsewhere. Remember, we started off by talking about in the entire state. The national economy, 81% say that they're voting on the economy in Iowa, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, as opposed to just 16% voting on any other issues. And then let's take a look now at I want to move on one more slide if we can. I want to take a look at our demographics now. Men and women, because as you know, Elaine, and we have been talking about a lot, there has been a big emphasis from the Biden campaign at looking at white men in particular in this area here. Maybe we'll just look back over at the board and I'll show you, since that's not the graphic I wanted to show you. Let's take a look more at what's happening in these states, particularly when we're talking about white college women. Biden is getting 62% of the white college-educated women in the Rust Belt here, and 37% of the white college-aged women are going for President Trump. But as I was telling you just a moment ago, even more important potentially for the Biden-Harris campaign would be white non-college educated men. And in that category, Biden and Harris have 31% of those voters, according to our exit polls, compared to 67% for President Trump. Remember, Elaine, when Biden was campaigning in these states, part of what he was trying to do was show that he had this working class background, this middle class background, that he believed in labor unions, and hoping that that message was going to resonate for white working class men in the Rust Belt here. Right now, those numbers in our exit polls aren't really bearing that out. So we're going to continue watching this, but it's not necessarily great news for Biden and Harris right now.
All right, Lana, Zach. Well, Lana, I know this is new technology that we have all been getting accustomed to. Great job tonight. And we've been doing this in the midst of this pandemic. So,
right.
You know, a lot of us aren't even in the building right now. But thank you so much for everything. And it's great to see you.
It's great to see you, too.
All right. It is nearly 11 p.m. on the East Coast, and polls are about to close in California, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. There are 78 total electoral votes at stake in those states, but that doesn't mean the country will hear the results of the election anytime soon. More than 101 million people voted ahead of the election, and in many states, those votes will not be counted for several days. CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns joins me now from Pennsylvania. Boy, Caitlin, I don't know how many times we've said Pennsylvania tonight, but first of all, just set the scene for us, because I want viewers to understand why it is that you are positioned where you are tonight.
Yes, this is Pennsylvania. 20 electoral votes was determined by just 44,000 votes in 2016 for Donald Trump. The reason that we have been so focused on Pennsylvania, in addition to those facts that I just described, is because the ballots are the issue here in Pennsylvania. Remember, we've been talking about states ramping up their absentee ballot programs. They did that here in Pennsylvania. 3 million absentee ballots have gone out here. We saw a record number in the primary as well. But unlike some of these other states, Pennsylvania didn't start opening up those ballots. They weren't allowed to start opening up those ballots until 7 a.m. this morning. So I'm outside the Pennsylvania Convention Center here in Philadelphia. You can see it behind me. In that building right there is where all of those ballots of Philadelphia are going to be. So they're processing those ballots. It's going to take a while. As we're looking at this electoral map and all these battleground states and a race that looks pretty tight, at least at this point, it could possibly come down to Pennsylvania. And we have seen this effort by both candidates, Trump and Biden, spending lots and lots of time here in Pennsylvania in the final stretch. Kind of a precursor to how this night could go, that it could possibly come down to tonight. But remember, we may not have the results. We likely won't have the results in Pennsylvania because of how long it's going to take to count all of those ballots.
Caitlin, let's talk about the Senate for a moment, because Democratic Senator Doug Jones lost his seat to Republican challenger Tommy Tuberville in Alabama. So remind us, even as we focus on the presidential contest, where does the race for control of the Senate stand now?
That's right. That Alabama result is not surprising, really, because Doug Jones won that seat, the Democrat, a few years ago in very unusual circumstances. So it was pretty much expected that he would not win that race tonight, especially as the president takes Alabama. We also, however, have on the flip side, Cory Gardner, Republican senator from Colorado, has lost his race to John Hickenlooper, the former governor of Colorado. The Democrat has won there. So Democrats lost a seat in Alabama, gained one in Colorado. We're still keeping an eye, however, on those two key battlegrounds in the South, Georgia and North Carolina, not only for the presidential race, but they have competitive Senate races there as well. Those are races that we'll be watching for balance of power in the Senate, along with Iowa.
All right, we want to let our viewers know we have another CBS News projection to tell them about. CBS News is projecting that Joe Biden will be the winner in Illinois with its 20 electoral votes. So we continue to keep an eye on those results. Caitlin, I also want to turn to the question of Arizona, because this is a development that's just happened here in the last hour or so, where we have seen the characterization of Arizona go from a toss-up to a now lean Biden. This is a state, as we talked with Leslie Sanchez, our CBS News analyst, a moment ago, about the changing demographics that have been happening in that state. What more can you tell us? Obviously, leaning Biden could still change, so we want to make sure people are aware, how fluid this is. But what can you tell us about that state in particular?
Well, this is emerging as a really interesting battleground. President Trump won it in 2016, but by just about 3 percentage points. And Democrats have seen potential advantages that they could make there. Remember, in 2018, they elected a Democrat to the Senate, Kyrsten Sinema, and there's also a competitive Senate race between incumbent Republican Martha McSally, who was appointed to that seat after the death of John McCain, and against Mark Kelly, who has raised a lot of money in Arizona. This is a state where the Biden team believes that if they can win, that allows them to have this clearer path to 270. So that's a big state and shows kind of the changing demographics. And as we're trying to assess what the coalitions for these parties look like after tonight, what the coalitions for a winning race looks like for the president, looking at places like Arizona, where you have these changing demographics, where you have this growth and changing among particularly people in the suburbs, that is clearly something to watch for the presidential and the Senate race. Would be a very big deal for the Biden team and for Democrats, because, as you mentioned, this is the home of Barry Goldwater. It's the home of John McCain, a very traditional Republican state.
Well, Caitlin, let me also ask you about Florida, which is currently leaning toward President Trump. What does that mean with respect to his pathway here? Because, we had Terry Sullivan on earlier, a Republican, talking about how it was a very narrow path to 270 for President Trump.
That's right. It absolutely keeps him in the running. And this is a state that the Trump campaign had been arguing that they could do well. And we're kind of seeing that. And it's really interesting also to look at what's happening in South Florida. This is a place that we've spent a lot of time reporting on the ground. A Democratic incumbent congresswoman lost her seat in South Florida, Donna Shalala. She is someone who flipped a Republican seat in 2018. Now that has flipped back to Republicans. So that's really interesting to watch. And former Vice President Joe Biden's numbers among Latino voters in that state is really critical. This keeps Donald Trump in the running. It's not entirely surprising given that he won it in 2016, but the Biden team was hoping that if they could win that state, that would cut off the president's path to victory, even if it was a long shot. So a big win potentially for the president, if that is ultimately called in his favor, keeps him in the running.
And with Texas, too, there had been talk, as you well know, of a potential blue flipping of that ruby red state. But we see here leaning for the Republican, leaning for President Trump. Caitlin, what is it that Democrats had been looking to Texas with some hopeful eyes? When I think about the suburbs, for instance, around some of those big cities, Democrats would point to, again, those changing demographics as perhaps a positive sign that they could, in fact, flip that state.
Absolutely. And this was always part of a longer theme for Democrats, a longer shot, I should say, for Democrats, and they kind of knew that, but hoping to what they're hoping to do in a place like Texas is kind of build out the party there, and you've seen that from people like Beto O'Rourke campaigning around the state, trying to flip seats in the state legislature, which could have a big impact on redistricting. But that looks like it's leaning in the president's favor tonight. But Democrats see this as kind of a longer game in turning that state. And going back to kind of what the messages from the candidates have been in the closing days, talking about a place like Texas, but also going back to Florida and explaining how the president could have been successful there, is that when he goes to a place like Florida, he casts this race as a race against socialism. That is something that we heard from supporters of the president when we were on the ground in Florida, when we're on the ground in some of these key battleground states. Supporters of President Trump tell us that they see this race not necessarily as a race between Joe Biden and President Trump. They see this as a race of President Trump versus a socialism, or a world in which he is describing could take place, and kind of casting a negative light. And they also see this as a race really between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. That's how a lot of Trump supporters have characterized this. So as we're looking to see some of these results and looking to see where the president may have had advantages in terms of messaging in a place like Florida, that could be the thing that helped tip in his favor.
All right. So, Caitlin, we have said it repeatedly, but please, in our final minutes here, before we let you go, remind our viewers what is necessary to actually project a winner when it comes to the presidential contest.
Well, the votes have to be counted, and it's going to be very difficult at this stage, especially if it comes down to a place like Pennsylvania, because we are likely not going to have those results. And remember, the Democratic campaigns had been focused on absentee voting and the early vote, and in places like Pennsylvania, that it will take a little while to be counted here. So still an early night, even though we're hitting the 11 o'clock hour, I think. Still a long way to go before this is over. We will be up for it. We've got lots of snacks and hand warmers, and we'll keep you posted on what happens.
And Caitlin, just one more last point. So this does not indicate that anything is wrong, per se. We've said this many, many times over the course of these past few weeks. It is simply that counting those votes just takes a while.
Exactly, and that's going on in the building behind me, and it's done by people and machines, and it does take a while to tabulate those votes. And that's why we've been reporting for the past several months, really, that we may not have results on election night, that doesn't say anything about the integrity of the election. It's not a delay. It's just the processing, the counting of votes takes a while.
All right. The indefatigable Caitlin Huey-Burns for us. Caitlin, thanks to you and your team for everything. It's been spectacular coverage all campaign season long. Thank you so much. Up next, it's the CBS News special report, America Decides. You're streaming CBSN. CBS News, always on. Welcome back to CBS News Election Night Headquarters. It's coming up on 11 o'clock in the east, 8 o'clock in the west. The polls are closing in 4 western states, including California. And here's the state of the race right now. CBS News projects President Trump has won these states: Indiana, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, Arkansas, North Dakota, South Dakota, Alabama, South Carolina, and Utah. Joe Biden has won Vermont, Delaware, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Maryland, Colorado, New Hampshire, Illinois, plus Washington, D.C. Most of the notable 9 states that could decide the election still toss-ups, but Florida leaning toward President Trump. We expected a tight race, and we're just getting started. And at this hour, CBS News can project that Joe Biden has won California and its 55 electoral votes. Also the home state of Senator Kamala Harris, his running mate. Biden is also likely to win Oregon and Washington state.
President Trump is likely to win Idaho. The electoral vote stands at Biden 168, President Trump 86. You need 270 to win the presidency. Well, the map finally has filled in, except for some of those notable nine states that we said in the beginning it would be all down to that. For folks at home who have opened up a caffeinated beverage or
an alcoholic one.
We're looking at those states. And the reason they are so close at this hour is because so many people turned out, and we're waiting for some of the vote count to come in.
Right, and one of the storylines of the evening has been that the Democrats voted early and in great and big numbers, and then the president's voters came out on Election Day and voted in great big numbers, and the vote is quite close in North Carolina, and then in Georgia, it's also taken them a little while to get the votes in, and There's Gwinnett County has only got 17% of the vote in, which is not very much. So that's also part of a little bit of a slowness there.
What cities are Gwinnett County, John? When you say
it's suburban Atlanta.
It's suburban Atlanta.
It's just outside Atlanta. It's the.
I didn't know where it was. Where was it?
It's the idea that that's where a lot of the population growth is, right around Atlanta. Let's take a wider aperture here. And Ed, I know you were talking to both campaigns, as I am as well, in between these breaks, emailing, and some people are wondering, well, if Biden can't win Florida, if it's getting close in North Carolina and Georgia, has this closed his path to the presidency? What are you hearing?
No, not necessarily. If you talk to Biden campaign aides right now, they remain hopeful that they can flip Arizona. Would be the first time that Democrats have won it since 1992. They also believe that they will ultimately prevail in Michigan and Wisconsin. But those are two of those big states with a lot of absentee ballots. They're going to take a little while to vote because of the pandemic and the fact that voting was kind of lopsided this year. A lot of it came early. If they don't get Florida, if they don't get Pennsylvania, there is still a path, they believe, but it involves a combination of Arizona and restoring the big blue wall in the upper Midwest. And right now in North Carolina, the Biden campaign says it all comes down to Wake County, North Carolina. There's just a small percentage left in one of that state's bigger counties. They're not quite sure whose vote it is to be had, but if it goes their way, they may just eke out a win in North Carolina. So, look, this is the scenario that we knew could happen, that we'd be waiting for a while for big states to turn in their ballots. And for now, a lot of it rests on these remaining 7 of the 9 that we're tracking that aren't leaning in either direction.
So let's take a look then at the map, because Major Garrett is over there. If the Biden campaign is telling us they feel very good about Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, map that out for us.
Again, I always start this map in these scenarios with where the president ended in 2016, 306 electoral votes. We've got Arizona, a lean Biden, so let's put that in the category. We're going to assume for right now in this scenario, again, this is what the Trump campaign tells us and what is so far the numbers have played out. Let's say Florida, Georgia, North Carolina hold for the president, even though they might hold narrowly. So you take Arizona, that gets Joe Biden to 243. You put Wisconsin there, you put Michigan there, you put Pennsylvania there. That's more than enough. But you would need all 3 and Arizona. You take Pennsylvania out, it's 269. It's not nearly enough. So you have to have all 3 of those if you can't crack through in North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And the one thing I will say about Florida, the Trump campaign said to me yesterday, if we win Florida by more than 2%, that means our modeling will be solid there, and we believe that modeling will be solid in Georgia, North Carolina, and everywhere else. Well, they're on pace to do even better than that. And every election at the presidential level is about knowing your model, knowing your voters, and knowing what they're going to do. And at this hour, at least in these early states, Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida, the Trump modeling is holding up.
And isn't it entirely possible, Major, that Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, the path to a Biden presidency, remain white or not called tonight because they're counting the vote so slowly?
Meaning not called, meaning they could be off the board in terms of allocations. That doesn't mean anyone is where they need to be. The president would go to 249, Joe Biden would be at 243, and it would be a waiting game.
And Margaret, you were reporting something about the city of Philadelphia, which is usually a Democratic stronghold, and the counting of ballots there.
Yes, and our David Becker, who we were consulting with earlier, has been speaking to officials that they expect a midnight update, but they have decided to hold off on counting mail-in ballots until tomorrow morning. So additional ballots there will be on hold. This is part of a plan. However, it's notable because it is such a substantial population center, and it is one of these states more broadly that we are waiting on. Nora, it's also interesting that the Trump campaign is sending out fundraising emails, according to our Nicole Skenga, saying they're not going to call the race. So they're setting the table to their supporters that somehow the reason we're not announcing decisions as to how the states are leaning has something to do with some sort of conspiracy there. And it's not.